A woman left to die in the Nevada wasteland. A rancher who defies every rule to save her. When mercy turns into something far more dangerous, their marriage of convenience ignites a war that will burn through the frontier and test whether love forged in desperation can survive when powerful men come to destroy everything they've built. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Mei Lin and Caleb's story travels. And if this tale of survival and unexpected devotion grips you, hit that like button and stay until the very end. You won't regret it. The desert had no mercy. Mei Lin knew this now, though the understanding came too late to save her. She lay crumpled in the dust where they'd thrown her, the afternoon sun pressing down like a blacksmith's hammer, each breath a ragged scrape against her throat. Around her, the Nevada wasteland stretched endless and indifferent, redstone, scattered sage, and a horizon that shimmered with heat, that made the distant mountains dance like ghosts. 3 days ago, she'd been a bride, or almost a bride. The wedding had never happened. Her betrothed, James Wu, had collapsed during the ceremony, clutching his chest as the color drained from his face. He'd died before the vows were complete, before her new life could begin, leaving her stranded in a country whose language still twisted strangely in her mouth, among people who'd never wanted her there in the first place. James's mother had been the first to speak the accusation. "Hak Sai," the old woman had hissed, her face contorted with grief and rage. Bad luck. Curse. The Chinese community in Virginia City had whispered the words behind their hands, and James's family had wasted no time. They'd stripped Mei Lin of the few possessions James had given her, loaded her onto a wagon with his younger brother driving, and taken her far from town. When the wagon finally stopped on this desolate stretch of trail, James's brother wouldn't meet her eyes. "Can't keep you," he'd muttered in Cantonese, his voice tight with something that might have been guilt or might have been fear. "Mother says you brought the death spirit, says it'll follow our family if you stay." "Please," Mei Lin had whispered, her fingers clutching the edge of the wagon. "I have nowhere That's not our problem." They'd left her with nothing. No water, no food, no horse, just the clothes on her back and the small cloth bundle that held her mother's jade bracelet, the last piece of home she still possessed. That had been hours ago, when the sun was high. Now it was sliding toward the western peaks, and Mei Lin could no longer stand. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her tongue felt swollen, foreign in her mouth. The world had started to tilt and blur at the edges, shapes losing their definition in the wavering heat. She tried to rise one more time, her palms pressing into the scorching dirt, but her arms gave out. She collapsed onto her side, dust coating her cheek, her dark hair falling across her face in tangled strands. This was where she would die then, alone on a trail in the middle of nowhere, in a land that had promised her a new beginning but had delivered only abandonment. Her mother's face swam into her vision, kind eyes, work-worn hands, the small house in Guangdong where Mei Lin had grown up, helping with the silkworms. Her mother had wept when Mei Lin left for America, clutching her daughter's hands and whispering prayers for her safety. She'd scraped together everything she had to send Mei Lin to meet James, a merchant's son who'd promised a better life. "I'm sorry, Mama," Mei Lin whispered into the dust, her voice barely a thread of sound. "I'm so sorry." The sun slipped lower. Shadows lengthened across the red earth. Mei Lin's eyes drifted closed, her consciousness fragmenting into disconnected pieces. Thirst, heat, the grit of sand between her teeth, the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. She didn't hear the hoofbeats at first. The sound came gradually, a rhythmic thunder that penetrated the haze of her dying thoughts. Mei Lin's eyes fluttered open, but she couldn't turn her head, couldn't do more than lie still as the sound grew louder, closer, until it stopped somewhere just beyond her limited field of vision. A shadow fell across her face, blocking the brutal sun. Jesus Christ! The voice was male, rough with shock, speaking English words Mei Lin's fading mind struggled to translate. She felt, rather than saw, someone drop to their knees beside her, felt large hands, careful, surprisingly gentle, turn her onto her back. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Mei Lin tried to focus on the face above her, but the features swam and doubled. She caught impressions: sun-darkened skin, a jaw rough with several days' stubble, eyes that might have been gray or blue beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dusty range clothes. He was saying something else, but the words didn't make sense. Everything was slipping away again, the world fading to a distant pinpoint. Then water touched her lips. Mei Lin gasped, her body jerking as cool liquid trickled into her mouth. The man's hand cradled the back of her head, lifting her slightly, and he held a canteen to her cracked lips with his other hand. "Easy," he murmured. "Not too fast. Just a little at a time." She drank, her throat working desperately, her hands rising weakly to clutch at his wrist. The water was the most beautiful thing she'd ever tasted, clean and cold, and impossibly precious. She choked slightly, coughing, and the man pulled the canteen back. "Steady now, you'll make yourself sick." Mei Lin's vision was clearing slightly, enough to see him more clearly now. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the desert sun. His eyes were gray, she realized, the color of storm clouds, and they studied her with concern and something else she couldn't quite identify. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Where did you come from?" Mei Lin opened her mouth, but her English deserted her completely. The words tangled on her tongue, emerging as fragmented Cantonese that she knew he couldn't understand. Ngo sek gong. I can't speak." The man's expression shifted, not with irritation, but with understanding. He glanced around the empty trail, taking in the absence of any wagon tracks except the old ones that marked the route, the lack of any supplies or horse, the brutal isolation of the spot. "Someone left you here," he said, and though she didn't catch all the words, his tone carried the meaning. His jaw tightened. "Sons of bitches." He stood, and for one terrible moment, Mei Lin thought he was going to leave her too. Her hand shot out, fingers closing weakly around the hem of his coat, and a sound escaped her throat, a desperate, wordless plea. The man looked down at her, and something in his expression softened. "I'm not leaving you," he said firmly. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that seemed almost courtly despite the circumstances. "Name's Caleb Turner. I've got a ranch about 10 miles west of here. You're coming with me." He moved with swift efficiency, gathering her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. Mei Lin was dimly aware of being lifted, of the solid warmth of his chest against her side, of the surprising gentleness with which he handled her. He carried her to where a large buckskin horse waited, ground-tied and patient. Getting them both into the saddle took some maneuvering, but Caleb managed it, settling Mei Lin in front of him and wrapping one arm securely around her waist to hold her upright. She sagged against him, too weak to maintain her own balance, her head resting against his shoulder. "Just hold on," Caleb said quietly. "We'll get you somewhere safe." The horse started forward at his command, moving at a careful walk that wouldn't jostle its fragile passenger too much. Mei Lin drifted in and out of consciousness as they traveled, aware only of the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, the iron strength of the arm holding her secure, and the unexpected safety of another human presence after hours of believing she would die alone. The sun had nearly set when they reached Red Mesa Ranch. Mei Lin stirred as Caleb reined in the horse, her eyes opening to see a sprawling adobe structure set against the darkening sky. Lamplight glowed in the windows, warm and welcoming. Outbuildings dotted the property, a barn, a stable, corrals where horses moved like shadows in the gathering dusk. "Ruth!" Caleb called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Ruth, I need you." The ranch house door flew open, and a woman emerged, older, perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that spoke of competence and no-nonsense practicality. She took one look at Mei Lin's limp form, and her eyes widened. "Lord have mercy, what happened?" "Found her on the Eastern Trail," Caleb said, already dismounting with Mei Lin still cradled carefully in his arms. "Someone left her out there to die. No water, no supplies, nothing." Ruth descended the porch steps, her expression hardening with anger. "Animals! Bring her inside, quickly. I'll get water heating and prepare the guest room." The interior of the ranch house was a blur to Mei Lin. Wooden floors, solid furniture, the smell of cooking food that made her empty stomach clench. Caleb carried her down a hallway and into a small bedroom where he laid her gently on a narrow bed covered with a faded quilt. "I'll leave you to tend to her," he said to Ruth, though his eyes lingered on Mei Lin's face with unmistakable concern. "Let me know if you need anything." "I will. Go on now." After Caleb left, Ruth worked with brisk efficiency, bringing basin after basin of warm water, carefully cleaning the dirt and dust from Mei Lin's face and hands. She helped Mei Lin drink more water, slowly, in small sips, and eventually brought a bowl of thin broth that she spooned into Mei Lin's mouth with patient determination. "Poor thing," Ruth murmured, her voice gentling as she worked. What kind of people would do this to a girl? Mei Lin understood the tone, if not all the words. She caught Ruth's hand weakly, trying to convey gratitude with her eyes since her English failed her. The older woman's expression softened further, and she patted Mei Lin's shoulder. "You're safe now, honey. Rest. We'll figure everything else out tomorrow." Clean, fed, and finally safe, Mei Lin sank into the first real sleep she'd had in days. Her dreams were fragmented and strange. Her mother's face, James's final gasping breaths, the burning sun, and then the shadow of a tall man blocking the light, offering water and mercy when the world had shown her nothing but cruelty. She woke to morning light streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting from somewhere deeper in the house. For a confused moment, Mei Lin couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The abandonment, the desert, Caleb Turner's strong arms lifting her to safety. She sat up slowly, her body protesting with aches and pains but functioning far better than it had the previous day. Someone, Ruth probably, had dressed her in a clean nightgown and left her clothes folded on a chair near the bed, laundered and mended where the trail had torn them. A soft knock sounded at the door. "You awake in there?" Ruth's voice called. "Huh?" Mei Lin started, then caught herself and tried the English word. "Yes." The door opened and Ruth entered with a tray bearing food and hot tea. She smiled when she saw Mei Lin sitting up. "Well, you've got some color back in your cheeks. That's a good sign." She set the tray on the small table beside the bed. "Eat what you can. You need to build your strength back." Mei Lin took the tea gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. She searched for English words, her tongue feeling clumsy. Thank you. You... Kind." Ruth's expression softened. "You don't have to thank me, honey. Any decent person would do the same." She paused, studying Mei Lin thoughtfully. "Can you tell me your name?" "Mei Lin," she managed. "My name? Mei Lin." "Mei Lin," Ruth repeated, pronouncing it carefully. "That's pretty. I'm Ruth Calloway. I keep house here for Mr. Turner, have for the past 8 years since his mother passed." She gestured toward the hallway. "He's been asking about you since sunrise. Wanted to make sure you were all right before he headed out to check the herd." Mei Lin's hands tightened on the cup. She thought of Caleb Turner's weathered face, his gentle handling of her despite her desperate state, the way he'd promised not to leave her. A stranger who'd shown her more kindness in one evening than James's family had shown in weeks. "Where I am?" she asked haltingly. "Red Mesa Ranch," Ruth said, "about 40 miles west of Virginia City. We're pretty isolated out here, but it's good land. Mr. Turner runs cattle, about 500 head across 12,000 acres." The numbers meant little to Mei Lin, but she understood the pride in Ruth's voice. This was a substantial operation, a successful ranch in a harsh landscape. Mei Lin struggled for the words, frustration tightening her throat. Her English lessons in Guangdong had been basic at best, focused on simple transactions and polite phrases. Nothing had prepared her for this situation. Must go. Cannot stay." Ruth's eyebrows rose. "Go where, honey? You've got somewhere to be?" Mei Lin's eyes dropped to her tea. Where could she go? Virginia City held nothing but accusation and rejection. She had no money, no friends in this country, no family to turn to. The truth of her situation crashed over her like a wave, and she felt tears prick at her eyes. "No," she whispered. "No place." "Then you'll stay here until you're fully recovered," Ruth said firmly. "And we'll figure out what comes next when you're stronger. Mister, Turner already said as much to me this morning." Before Mei Lin could respond, the sound of boots on the wooden floor announced someone's approach. Caleb appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, his gray eyes immediately finding Mei Lin's face. "Morning," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You look considerably better than you did yesterday." Mei Lin set down her teacup, suddenly acutely aware of being in her nightgown in front of this man. Heat rose in her cheeks, and she pulled the quilt higher around her shoulders. If Caleb noticed her embarrassment, he was gentleman enough not to show it. He stayed in the doorway, keeping a respectful distance. "Ruth's been taking good care of you, I see." "Yes," Mei Lin said softly. "Thank you. You saved me. I thank you." Something flickered in Caleb's expression, pain perhaps, or anger at whoever had left her to die. Any decent man would have done the same. "Not any man," Mei Lin said, her English halting but earnest. "You, good man." Caleb looked uncomfortable with the praise. He turned his hat in his hands, studying the brim as if it held fascinating secrets. "I need to ride out to the north pasture, but I'll be back by evening. You need anything, you tell Ruth." He turned to leave, but Mei Lin called out before she could stop herself. "Mr. Turner?" He paused, glancing back. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why you help me?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes steady on hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but certain. "Because leaving someone to suffer when you have the power to help makes you no better than an animal. And because—" he hesitated, then continued, "because everyone deserves a chance at something better than dying alone in the dust." With that, he settled his hat on his head and walked away, his boots echoing down the hall. Mei Lin stared at the empty doorway, something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not quite hope, not yet, but perhaps the distant possibility of it. Ruth cleared her throat, breaking the spell. "Finish your breakfast, dear. Then we'll see about getting you properly dressed and maybe taking a short walk. You need to rebuild your strength." Over the following days, Mei Lin slowly came back to herself. Under Ruth's patient care, her body healed. The sunburn faded, the dehydration resolved, her strength gradually returning. She learned the rhythms of Red Mesa Ranch, the early morning when the hands gathered for breakfast before heading out to their work, the quiet afternoons when Ruth taught her simple English phrases while they worked in the kitchen, the evenings when Caleb returned from the range and sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Caleb kept his distance, polite but reserved, and Mei Lin understood why. She was a complication in his ordered life, a stranger whose presence raised questions he clearly wasn't ready to answer, but he never made her feel unwelcome. When she appeared hesitantly in the kitchen on her third morning, finally strong enough to leave the bedroom, he'd simply nodded at the empty chair across from him and continued eating his breakfast as if her presence there was the most natural thing in the world. Ruth proved to be a patient teacher. She pointed to objects around the house, table, chair, window, door, and had Mei Lin repeat the English words until they felt less foreign on her tongue. In return, Mei Lin taught Ruth a few Cantonese phrases, laughing at the older woman's attempts to wrap her mouth around the tonal sounds. "Magoy," Ruth said carefully, practicing the phrase for thank you. "Good," Mei Lin encouraged, smiling. "Very good." "This language of yours is a sight harder than English," Ruth declared, but she was grinning. These small moments of normalcy helped ease the raw terror that still lived in Mei Lin's chest, the fear that this safety was temporary, that she would be sent away again with nowhere to go. She tried not to think about the future, focusing instead on the present, learning English, helping Ruth with small tasks around the house, sitting on the porch in the evenings and watching the vast desert sky turn purple with dusk. It was during one of these evenings, about a week after her arrival, that Caleb finally broke the careful silence between them. Mei Lin was sitting on the porch steps, her mother's jade bracelet turning slowly in her fingers, the only possession she had left from her old life. Caleb emerged from the house, a cup of coffee in hand, and paused when he saw her there. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Mei Lin shook her head and shifted slightly to make room. Caleb settled onto the step beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance, and sipped his coffee as he gazed out at the darkening landscape. They sat in comfortable silence for a time. A coyote called in the distance, its lonely cry echoing across the desert. The first stars were beginning to appear in the deepening sky. "Ruth tells me your English is improving," Caleb said eventually. Good teacher," Mei Lin replied. "Patient." "That she is." Caleb paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. Mei Lin, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Do you have anywhere to go? Any family or friends who might take you in? Mei Lin's fingers tightened on the bracelet. She'd known this question was coming, had been dreading it. No, she said quietly. No family here. In China, yes. Here. She shook her head. Caleb nodded slowly, his expression unreadable in the fading light. What about the people who left you out there? Would they take you back? No. The word came out sharper than she intended. They say, I bring bad luck. She struggled for the word, then gave up and used the Cantonese. Mihon fu, husband soon, he die. They say I kill him, say I curse. That's ridiculous, Caleb said flatly. Man dies of heart failure. That's not anyone's curse. That's just bad fortune. Mei Lin looked at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. In her experience, few people were willing to argue against superstition, especially when it came to death and misfortune. You believe me? She asked. I believe in what I can see and what makes sense, Caleb said. And blaming a young woman for something she had no control over doesn't make a lick of sense to me. He turned to face her more fully. But that puts us in a difficult position. You can't stay here indefinitely without it causing talk. And in a place like this, talk can be dangerous. Mei Lin's heart sank. So this was it. The conversation where he would tell her she had to leave, had to find her own way somehow. She braced herself for the blow, but Caleb's next words weren't what she expected. I've been thinking on a solution, he said slowly. It's not conventional, and I don't want you to feel pressured, but it might work for both of us, if you're willing. Mei Lin waited, hardly breathing. Caleb set his coffee cup down and leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together. This ranch is everything to me. I built it up from almost nothing after my father died. Bought land, built the herd, turned it into something profitable. But there are men in this valley who'd like to see me fail. Victor Hale, who owns the ranch to the south, has been trying to buy me out for years. When I wouldn't sell, he started making things difficult, cutting off my water access, pressuring the bank to call in my loans early, spreading rumors about my business practices. He paused, his jaw tightening with frustration. The bank's been getting nervous. They want to see stability. A family man looks more reliable than a bachelor running a spread this size. They want assurance that if something happens to me, the ranch won't just fold. Mei Lin was beginning to understand, but she hardly dared believe it. Caleb turned to look at her directly, his gray eyes serious in the twilight. What I'm proposing is a marriage of convenience, legal and binding, but practical rather than romantic. You'd have my name, my protection, and a respected position in the community. No one could question your right to be here or call you what they called you before. In return, you'd help me secure my land and my future with the bank. The words hung in the air between them, enormous and impossible. You want marry me? Mei Lin whispered, her English failing her in her shock. But you not know me. No, Caleb agreed. But I know you're in trouble. And I know I have the means to help. And I know that leaving you to fend for yourself would weigh on my conscience for the rest of my life. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that spoke of uncertainty beneath his calm exterior. I'm not asking for love, Mei Lin. I'm not even asking for anything beyond what you're comfortable giving. Just a partnership. A way for both of us to survive in a world that doesn't look kindly on people in difficult positions. Mei Lin's mind raced. Marriage to a stranger, in a foreign land, with customs she barely understood. Everything in her rebelled against the idea. It was too quick, too strange, too desperate. But what was her alternative? To strike out on her own with no money, no connections, and limited English? To try to make her way back to Virginia City, where she would be shunned and blamed? To somehow earn passage back to China? Back to her widowed mother who'd sacrificed everything to send her here in the first place? You not want wife? She asked hesitantly. Real wife? Caleb's expression was hard to read. I won't lie to you. Someday, maybe, I hope to marry for love like my parents did. But I'm 32 years old, and I've been too busy building this ranch to court anyone properly. And right now, what I need more than romance is someone who can help me keep everything I've worked for from being stolen out from under me. He held her gaze steadily. I won't force you into anything you don't want, Mei Lin. If you agree to this, we'll have separate rooms. You'll be treated with respect, both by me and by everyone who works here. And if someday you want to leave, if you find somewhere better to go or someone you want to be with, we can discuss ending the arrangement. But right now, today, this is what I can offer you. Safety, protection, a name that no one will dare speak ill of. Mei Lin looked down at the jade bracelet in her hands. She thought of her mother, who'd married Mei Lin's father in an arrangement made by their families, who'd never complained about the lack of romance, but who'd built a life of quiet dignity and hard work. She thought of the alternative, the desert, the burning sun, the certainty of death, and she thought of Caleb Turner, who'd stopped when he could have ridden past, who'd carried her to safety when he could have left her, who was offering her a lifeline when the world had shown her nothing but cruelty. "If I say yes," she said slowly, carefully shaping the English words, I try to be good wife. I work. I help. She struggled for the phrase Ruth had taught her. "I earn my keep." Something softened in Caleb's expression. "You don't have to earn anything, Mei Lin. You're not a servant. If we do this, you'd be my wife in the eyes of the law and the community. That means you'd have rights here, authority over the household, a say in how things are run." "And you?" Mei Lin asked quietly. "What you want from me?" "Honestly?" Caleb looked out at the darkening desert. "Just your presence, just the knowledge that I'm not alone out here, that there's someone in the house who makes it feel less empty." He glanced at her. "Is that enough, or is it asking too much?" Mei Lin considered this. In her culture, marriages were practical arrangements more often than not. Love, if it came at all, grew over time from shared work and shared lives. What Caleb was proposing wasn't so different from what her own parents had experienced or what she'd expected with James, except that Caleb was giving her a choice. He was asking, not demanding. He was offering partnership, not ownership. "I say yes," she said softly. "I marry you." Caleb let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. "You're sure? I don't want you to feel, I sure." Mei Lin interrupted. She met his eyes, willing him to see her sincerity despite her broken English. "You save my life. You give me chance. I say yes." They sat together in the growing darkness, two strangers who'd just agreed to bind their lives together, each for their own desperate reasons. Above them, the stars emerged in full glory, countless and brilliant against the black velvet of the desert sky. "We'll do it properly," Caleb said after a while. "I'll ride into town tomorrow and speak to the minister. We can be married by the end of the week, if that suits you." "Yes," Mei Lin agreed, though the word felt surreal in her mouth. "And Mei Lin?" Caleb's voice was gentle. "Thank you. I know this isn't what you came to America for, and I know I'm not, well, I'm just a rancher, but I promise you'll be safe here. That's one thing I can guarantee." Mei Lin thought of all the promises that had been broken in her short life. Her mother's promise that America would be better, James's promise of a new beginning, his family's implicit promise of acceptance. But when she looked at Caleb Turner's weathered face, at the quiet strength in his gray eyes, she found herself believing him. "I know," she said simply, and in that moment, under the vast Nevada sky, an unlikely partnership was forged, one that would be tested by fire, violence, and the unforgiving nature of the frontier itself. But that testing still lay ahead. For now, there was only the desert night, the distant cry of coyotes, and two people who'd found in each other an unexpected answer to prayers they hadn't known they were praying. Ruth appeared in the doorway behind them, lamplight spilling out onto the porch. "Supper's ready," she called, then paused, looking between them. "Everything all right out here?" Caleb stood, offering his hand to help Mei Lin to her feet. When she placed her small hand in his larger, calloused one, something passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but perhaps the first stirring of trust. "Everything's fine, Ruth," Caleb said. "Better than fine. Mei Lin and I are getting married." Ruth's eyes went wide, but after a moment of shock, a slow smile spread across her face. "Well, I'll be. That's wonderful news." She looked at Mei Lin with warm approval. "Welcome to the family, dear." Mei Lin smiled back, the expression still feeling fragile and new, but genuine nonetheless. "Thank you." As they filed into the house for dinner, Mei Lin caught her reflection in the window glass. A young Chinese woman in borrowed clothes, about to marry a stranger in a land still foreign to her tongue. A month ago, she would have been terrified. A week ago, she would have been too broken to care. But tonight, walking into the warm lamplight of Red Mesa Ranch with Caleb Turner beside her and Ruth Calloway fussing over wedding plans, Mei Lin felt something she hadn't felt since leaving Guangdong. She felt like she might actually survive this. And survival, she was learning, was only the beginning. The wedding took place on a Saturday morning, 5 days after Caleb's proposal on the porch. The minister from Silver Creek, a small settlement 20 miles south, arrived just after dawn, his buggy kicking up dust as it rolled into the ranch yard. Reverend Patterson was a thin man with kind eyes and a tendency to ask too many questions, but Caleb had known him for years and trusted his discretion. Ruth had spent the week in a flurry of preparation, insisting that even a practical marriage deserved some measure of ceremony. She'd altered one of her own dresses for Mei Lin, a simple gown of pale blue cotton that brought out the warmth in Mei Lin's skin and fit surprisingly well after Ruth's careful needlework. She'd also baked a small cake, swept the house until every surface gleamed, and arranged wildflowers in mason jars throughout the main room. "A wedding's a wedding," she'd declared when Caleb suggested she was going to unnecessary trouble. "And every bride deserves to feel special on her day, practical arrangement or not." Now Mei Lin stood in the small bedroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror Ruth had brought in. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger, cleaner and healthier than she'd been in weeks. Wearing a dress that actually fit, her hair pinned back with the jade hairpin her mother had given her before she left China. In her hands, she held a small bouquet Ruth had fashioned from sage blossoms and desert marigolds. A knock sounded at the door. "Mei Lin, it's time, dear." Ruth's voice was gentle. Mei Lin took a deep breath, steadying herself. Her hands trembled slightly, and she pressed them together, forcing them still. This was her choice, her decision. She was walking into this with open eyes. She opened the door to find Ruth waiting, dressed in her Sunday best, a warm smile on her face. "You look beautiful," Ruth said softly. "Truly." "Thank you," Mei Lin managed. Her English had improved rapidly over the past week, fueled by necessity and Ruth's patient teaching. She could hold simple conversations now, though complex thoughts still tangled on her tongue. They walked together down the hallway toward the main room. Through the doorway, Mei Lin could see Caleb standing near the fireplace, dressed in what was clearly his best suit, dark wool, carefully pressed, with a string tie at his collar. He looked uncomfortable in the formal clothes, his broad shoulders straining slightly against the jacket. But when he turned and saw Mei Lin, something shifted in his expression. For a moment she saw genuine admiration in his gray eyes, quickly shuddered but unmistakable. Reverend Patterson stood beside Caleb, his Bible open in his hands. Two ranch hands, Jack and Tom, the only other people living on the property, stood awkwardly to one side, serving as witnesses. They'd removed their hats and slicked back their hair, clearly ill at ease, but trying their best to show respect. Mei Lin's steps slowed as she entered the room, suddenly acutely aware of the weight of what she was about to do. This wasn't like her almost wedding to James, where she'd been surrounded by his family and members of the Chinese community, where the ceremony would have followed traditions she understood. This was foreign territory, strange customs, words she'd have to trust meant what Caleb said they meant. Ruth squeezed her arm gently. "It's all right, dear. Just stand beside him and answer when the Reverend asks you questions. I'll be right here." Mei Lin crossed the room to stand beside Caleb. He gave her a small nod, his expression serious but not unkind. "You look real nice," he said quietly, too low for the others to hear. "Thank you, you too. You also." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. Then Reverend Patterson cleared his throat and they both turned to face him. The ceremony was brief and straightforward. Patterson spoke about marriage and commitment, about the seriousness of the vows they were about to take, about the responsibilities they were accepting. Mei Lin understood perhaps half of the words, but she caught the important ones: husband, wife, honor, cherish, together. When Patterson asked if there were any objections, the room fell silent except for the ticking of the mantel clock. Mei Lin held her breath, half expecting someone to burst through the door and denounce her as cursed, as bad luck, as unworthy of this small chance at redemption. But no one came. The moment passed. Caleb Turner, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? Caleb's voice was steady and clear. I do. Patterson turned to Mei Lin. He spoke more slowly now, conscious of her limited English. Mei Lin, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? The words echoed in Mei Lin's mind. Until death do you part. She thought of James, who died before they could speak these same vows. She thought of the desert where she'd nearly died herself. She thought of her mother, an ocean away, who would never know about this wedding, this ranch, this tall American rancher who'd offered her sanctuary. I do, she said, her voice smaller than she'd intended, but clear enough. Do you have the rings? Caleb produced 2 simple gold bands from his pocket. He'd ridden to Silver Creek 3 days ago to purchase them from the general store. They were plain and unadorned, practical like everything else about this arrangement, but they gleamed softly in the morning light. He took Mei Lin's hand, his touch warm and slightly rough from years of ranch work, and slid the smaller ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Ruth must have told him the size. Then Mei Lin took the larger ring with trembling fingers and placed it on Caleb's hand, the metal looking small against his broad palm. It took her 2 tries to get it over his knuckle, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Caleb remained patient and still, waiting until she managed it. By the power vested in me by the territory of Nevada, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Patterson closed his Bible with a soft thump. You may kiss the bride. Mei Lin's eyes widened slightly. She'd known this was coming. Ruth had warned her, but the reality of it still sent a jolt of nervousness through her. She looked up at Caleb, uncertain. Caleb seemed equally uncertain. He hesitated, then leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. His lips brushed against her forehead, gentle, brief, chaste, and then he straightened, his hand falling away from hers. It wasn't a romantic kiss, but it was respectful, kind even. Mei Lin felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Congratulations, Patterson said, shaking Caleb's hand. I hope you'll both be very happy together. Thank you, Reverend, Caleb replied. We appreciate you making the journey out here. Ruth was already bustling toward the kitchen. I've got coffee ready and cake. Come, everyone, sit down and celebrate properly. The small gathering moved to the dining table, where Ruth served thick slices of spice cake and strong coffee. The ranch hands, Jack and Tom, offered awkward congratulations, clearly unsure how to address Mei Lin now that she was their employer's wife. She smiled at them as best she could, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. Reverend Patterson ate quickly, citing the long journey back to Silver Creek, and departed within the hour. The ranch hands excused themselves soon after, eager to return to work and escape the strangeness of the formal occasion. That left Caleb, Mei Lin, and Ruth sitting at the table, the weight of what had just occurred settling over them like desert dust. Ruth stood, gathering plates. I'll clean up. You two should, well, perhaps take a walk. Enjoy the day? Caleb glanced at Mei Lin. Would you like that? To walk, I mean. I could show you more of the property. Mei Lin nodded. Yes, I like. They left the house together, walking in silence across the ranch yard. The morning was already growing warm, the sun climbing steadily in a cloudless sky. Caleb kept his hands in his pockets, maintaining a careful distance, and Mei Lin was grateful for the space. He led her past the barn and corrals toward a low rise that overlooked the valley. From this vantage point, she could see the full scope of Red Mesa Ranch, the adobe house and outbuildings, the network of fences and corrals, the vast stretches of scrubland dotted with cattle. Beyond, the desert rolled away in waves of red and ochre, broken by distant mesas that rose like islands from a stone sea. This is what I'm fighting for, Caleb said quietly. Every acre, every head of cattle, every fence post. My father started this ranch with nothing but determination and a mortgage he could barely afford. When he died, I was 19. Everyone said I should sell, that I was too young to make it work, but I couldn't let go of what he'd built. Mei Lin listened, understanding the emotion beneath the words, even where the vocabulary escaped her. I've spent 13 years building this place up, Caleb continued. Added land, grew the herd, made it profitable. And now Victor Hale wants to take it from me, piece by piece if he has to. He's got more money, more influence, more connections in Virginia City. But he doesn't have more claim to this land than I do. Why he want your land? Mei Lin asked. Water rights mostly. There's a creek that runs through my northern pasture. It's the best water source for miles. Hale's been trying to buy me out for years, but when I wouldn't sell, he started playing dirty. Cut my access to the main road last spring, forcing me to drive cattle an extra 20 miles to reach the rail station. Talked the bank into calling my loans early. Spread rumors that I was mismanaging the ranch, that I was a bad risk. His jaw tightened. The bank's been watching me close. They want to see stability, proof that the ranch can survive long term. A married man with a family looks more stable than a bachelor. It's not right, but it's how they think. Mei Lin absorbed this, turning the information over in her mind. So their marriage served a specific purpose beyond simply giving her a place to stay. It was armor against Caleb's enemies, protection for what he'd built. She was part of his defense now, whether she'd understood that fully before or not. This man, Hale, she said carefully. He dangerous? Caleb's expression darkened. He can be. He's not the type to get his hands dirty himself, but he employs men who will. I've had cattle go missing, fences cut, equipment damaged. Nothing I could prove was his doing, but I know. A chill ran down Mei Lin's spine despite the growing heat of the day. She'd married into a war, she realized, a quiet war, perhaps, fought with economics and influence rather than open violence, but a war nonetheless. You scared? She asked. Cautious, Caleb corrected. I know what I'm up against, and I'm prepared to fight for what's mine, but I won't pretend there's no risk. He looked at her directly. I'm sorry I've pulled you into this. It wasn't fair not to explain all of it before we married. Mei Lin shook her head. You give me choice. You give me safety. She struggled for the right words. I already have danger before. People who hate me. Now I have reason to fight. Have place worth protecting. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. You're stronger than you look. Have to be, Mei Lin said simply. No choice. They stood together on the rise, looking out over the ranch that was now, legally, as much hers as his. The gold band on Mei Lin's finger caught the sunlight, gleaming against her skin, and she twisted it absently, still getting used to the weight. I know this isn't what you wanted when you came to America, Caleb said after a while. I know you probably had dreams of something different, something better. Mei Lin thought about this. Had she dreamed? She'd imagined America as a place of opportunity, certainly. She'd hoped for a kind husband, a comfortable home, children perhaps. Simple dreams, practical dreams. Dreams that had died with James on what should have been their wedding day. Dreams change, she said quietly. I learning this. Caleb nodded slowly. Well, for what it's worth, I'll do my best to make this work, to make you comfortable here. This is your home now for as long as you want it to be. Our home, Mei Lin corrected, and saw surprise flicker across his face again. Our home, he agreed. They walked back to the house as the sun climbed higher, and Mei Lin felt the strange weight of her new identity settling over her shoulders like an unfamiliar cloak. She was Mrs. Turner now, Mei Lin Turner, a rancher's wife in the Nevada desert, bound to a man she barely knew in a land still foreign to her tongue. But she was alive. She had a roof over her head and food in her belly and a gold ring on her finger that meant something, even if that something wasn't love. It was more than she'd had a week ago, more than she'd thought she would survive to see. And for now, that was enough. Over the following weeks, Mei Lin began to carve out a place for herself at Red Mesa Ranch. Ruth taught her the household routines, how to manage the kitchen, how to preserve food for the winter months ahead, how to keep accounts and order supplies from the general store in Silver Creek. The work was familiar in some ways, reminding her of helping her mother in Guangdong, but different in its details and scale. She learned to bake bread in the cast-iron stove, though her first attempts came out dense and hard enough to use as ammunition. Ruth laughed, not unkindly, and showed her the trick of kneading the dough just enough but not too much, of judging the oven's temperature by how long she could hold her hand inside. She learned the English names for cuts of meat and types of vegetables, for cooking implements and cleaning supplies. She learned to read Ruth's neat handwriting in the household ledgers and eventually began making entries herself, her characters careful and precise. And slowly, cautiously, she learned the rhythms of living with Caleb Turner. He was a quiet man, she discovered. Not cold, but reserved, more comfortable with action than words. He rose before dawn each day and often didn't return until after dark, spending long hours on horseback, checking fences, moving cattle, managing the endless details of running a ranch this size. When he was home, he was polite and considerate, always asking if she needed anything, thanking her for meals, treating her with a careful respect that never crossed into familiarity. They maintained separate bedrooms, as promised. Caleb's room was at the far end of the hall, Mei Lin's near Ruth's, and he never entered her space without knocking and waiting for permission. The arrangement was proper, even formal, and Mei Lin appreciated the boundaries even as they sometimes felt strange. She'd been raised to expect that marriage meant sharing a bed, bearing children, building a family. This marriage was different, a partnership without intimacy, a legal bond without the physical connection that usually came with it. She didn't know how to feel about that. Relief, mostly. But sometimes, lying alone in her narrow bed at night, she felt a curious loneliness that she couldn't quite name. One evening, about 3 weeks after the wedding, Caleb came home earlier than usual. Mei Lin was in the kitchen with Ruth, rolling out dough for dumplings, a recipe from home that she'd been trying to recreate with the ingredients available here. The results were never quite right, but the process soothed her, connected her to her mother across the vast ocean between them. Caleb appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, watching them work. "That smells different," he observed. "What are you making?" "Dumplings," Mei Lin said, her English more confident now. "From China. I try to make like my mother, but—" She gestured at the dough, which wasn't quite the right consistency. "Not same. Can I try one when they're ready?" Mei Lin glanced at Ruth, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes. You try." Caleb lingered in the kitchen, unusual for him. Usually he disappeared to wash up and change before dinner, preferring to stay out of the way while the women worked. But tonight he pulled out a chair and sat at the table, watching Mei Lin's quick, practiced movements as she filled and folded the dumplings. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he asked. "My mother. She teach me when I am—" Mei Lin paused, searching for the word for age. "When I small. Young." "You miss her?" It wasn't a question, but Mei Lin answered anyway. "Every day. She is alone now. My father died 5 years ago. I am only child. She sent me here for better life, but now—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the guilt that gnawed at her, that her mother had sacrificed so much only to send Mei Lin into disaster. "You could write to her," Caleb suggested. "Let her know you're all right. There's mail service through Silver Creek. Slow, but it gets to San Francisco eventually, and from there to China." Mei Lin's hand stilled on the dumpling she was folding. You let me write?" Caleb frowned. "Why wouldn't I? She's your mother. Of course you should write to her." "James' family, they say no. Say I bring shame, no contact with family in China." Caleb's expression hardened. "Well, they don't have a say in your life anymore. You're my wife now, and I'm telling you to write to your mother. Ruth can help you get the letter posted." Something loosened in Mei Lin's chest, a knot she hadn't realized was there. The idea of being able to tell her mother that she was alive, that she was safe, even if she couldn't explain the full truth of her circumstances, was an unexpected gift. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Nothing to thank me for. It's basic decency." Ruth made a soft sound that might have been approval and moved to check the pot of water heating on the stove. "These ready to cook, Mei Lin?" "Yes, almost." They boiled the dumplings in batches, and when the first ones were ready, Mei Lin served them with a simple dipping sauce she'd made from vinegar and the few spices Ruth kept in the pantry. Caleb took one cautiously, clearly uncertain what to expect. Mei Lin watched as he bit into it, waiting for his reaction. The dumplings weren't perfect. The dough was thicker than it should have been, the filling not quite right, but they were edible, recognizable. Caleb chewed thoughtfully, then nodded. "That's good. Different, but good." He took another. "Your mother taught you well." Pride warmed Mei Lin's chest. "She could cook. Better than me." Well, you're good enough for this household, Ruth declared. These are delicious, dear. They ate the dumplings for dinner along with the beef stew Ruth had made earlier, and the meal felt different somehow, less formal, more companionable. Caleb asked questions about China, about Guangdong province where Mei Lin had grown up, about her family's silkworm farm. Mei Lin answered as best she could, her English improving with each conversation, and found herself asking questions in return about the ranch, about Nevada, about Caleb's childhood here in the desert. It was the longest conversation they'd had since the wedding, and when it ended, Mei Lin felt like she'd learned more about her husband in one evening than in all the previous weeks combined. Later that night, lying in bed, she thought about Caleb's face when he'd tasted her dumplings. The surprise, the genuine pleasure, the way he'd taken 3 more without being prompted. Such a small thing, cooking food from home, but it had built a bridge between them, however small. Perhaps that was how this marriage would work, she thought. Not through grand gestures or passionate declarations, but through small moments of connection, through dumplings and conversations in the kitchen, through learning to inhabit the same space without fear or discomfort. It wasn't what she'd imagined when she'd dreamed of marriage as a girl in Guangdong. But it wasn't terrible either. The following week brought the first real test of their new arrangement. Mei Lin was hanging laundry in the yard, sheets and shirts snapping in the desert wind, when she heard the approach of multiple horses. She looked up, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and saw 3 riders approaching the ranch house. The man in the lead was well dressed by frontier standards, wearing a tailored coat and a wide-brimmed hat with a silver band. He rode a magnificent black stallion, and even from a distance, Mei Lin could sense the arrogance in the way he sat his saddle. The 2 men flanking him had the hard look of hired guns, their hands resting casually near their holsters. Ruth emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression tight with displeasure. "That's Victor Hale," she said quietly to Mei Lin. "Don't let him rattle you, dear. He's all bluster." But Mei Lin's instincts, honed by her time with James's hostile family, told her this man was dangerous in ways that went beyond bluster. Hale reined in his horse in the yard, his eyes sweeping over the property with an assessing gaze that felt like ownership. When his attention landed on Mei Lin, his eyebrows rose. "Well, well, and who do we have here?" "Mrs. Turner," Ruth said firmly before Mei Lin could respond. "Mr. Turner's wife." Hale's expression shifted, surprise, calculation, something that might have been amusement. "Is that so? I'd heard rumors, but I didn't believe them. Caleb Turner, married to a Chinese girl." He said it like it was a joke, something absurd. How unexpected. Mei Lin felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her chin up, refusing to show how his tone affected her. She'd heard worse from James's family. "Mr. Turner is checking the north pasture," Ruth continued, her voice cold. "If you have business with him, you'll have to come back another time." "Oh, I'm in no hurry." Hale dismounted, his movements casual, and his men did the same. "I can wait. Perhaps the new Mrs. Turner can offer us some hospitality while we're here. Coffee, maybe?" "We don't have any maid," Ruth said flatly. "Then make some." Hale's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm curious to meet the woman who finally convinced Caleb Turner to take a wife. That must have been quite a feat." Mei Lin understood enough of the words and all of the tone. This man was mocking her, mocking Caleb, mocking their marriage. He thought they were a joke, something to be dismissed. "My husband is good man," she said, her English careful but clear. "He give me his name, his home. I am proud to be Mrs. Turner." Hale's eyebrows climbed higher. "She speaks. How charming." He took a step closer, looking down at her with undisguised condescension. "Tell me, Mrs. Turner, do you have any idea what you've gotten yourself into? This ranch is failing. Your husband is drowning in debt. When the bank finally forecloses, and they will, where will you be then?" "The ranch is not failing," Ruth snapped. "And you have no business." "I'm just being realistic," Hale interrupted smoothly. "A practical marriage to save a dying ranch. It's almost admirable in a desperate sort of way." His gaze returned to Mei Lin. "But desperation doesn't pay debts, Mrs. Turner, and it won't protect this land when I finally acquire it." "You will not acquire it." Caleb's voice cut across the yard like a whip. Everyone turned to see him striding toward them, his expression thunderous, his hand resting on the rifle he carried across his saddle. He must have seen the riders from the pasture and come at a gallop. His horse was lathered and breathing hard where he'd tied it near the barn. Hale's smile widened, but it was sharp-edged now, predatory. "Caleb, there you are. I was just making the acquaintance of your lovely wife. Get off my property, Hale. Now, is that any way to treat a neighbor? I came in friendship, to offer my congratulations on your marriage." "You don't have a friendly bone in your body," Caleb said flatly. He positioned himself between Hale and Mei Lin, a subtle but deliberate move. "You've got 10 seconds to mount up and ride out. After that, you're trespassing, and I'm within my rights to defend my land." The two hired guns shifted, hands moving closer to their weapons. The air went taut with tension, violence hovering just below the surface. Hale raised his hands in mock surrender, still smiling. "No need for hostility. I'm leaving." He turned toward his horse, then paused, looking back. "But Caleb, this changes nothing. Your loan comes due in 4 months. The bank will want payment in full, and we both know you don't have it. When that happens, I'll be ready to make a very generous offer for this land. I'll burn it to bedrock before I sell to you." "Careful with threats like that," Hale said lightly. "Someone might think you're unstable, and unstable men make poor risks for banks." He swung into his saddle with practiced grace. "Mrs. Turner, it was a pleasure. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other." He wheeled his horse and rode out, his men following. They didn't hurry, making their exit as leisurely as their arrival, a final show of disrespect. Caleb stood rigid until they were out of sight, his jaw clenched so tight Mei Lin could see the muscle jumping. When he finally turned to look at her, his eyes were dark with anger. "Did he threaten you? Did he touch you?" "No," Mei Lin said quickly. "He just talk. Say bad things about the ranch, about our marriage. But he not hurt me." Some of the tension left Caleb's shoulders. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Hale's a snake, and he's got no shame about where he strikes." "He say ranch failing," Mei Lin said quietly. "He say bank will take. Is true?" Caleb's expression closed off. "That's my concern, not yours." "I am your wife. Is our concern now." The words hung between them, and Mei Lin saw the moment Caleb registered them, really heard them. Their marriage might have started as a practical arrangement, but she'd meant what she said during the ceremony. For better or worse. That included the worse. Caleb scrubbed a hand over his face, suddenly looking exhausted. "Come inside, I'll tell you everything. You deserve to know what you're up against." They sat in the main room, Caleb, Mei Lin, and Ruth, while Caleb laid out the situation with brutal honesty. The ranch was profitable, but barely. Drought 2 years ago had thinned the herd, and he'd had to take loans to rebuild it. The bank was nervous, pressured by Hale's influence and his insinuations that Caleb was a bad risk. The loan came due in 4 months, and while Caleb believed he could make the payment if he sold most of the herd, it would leave him vulnerable for the winter. "Hale's been patient," Caleb said grimly, "playing a long game. He knows if he can get the bank to foreclose, he can buy the land for a fraction of what it's worth, and he's been doing everything in his power to make sure that happens." "Why the bank listen to him?" Mei Lin asked. "Because he's rich, he's influential, and he owns the second largest ranch in the valley. They think he's a safer bet than me." Caleb's hands clenched into fists on his knees. "But I'll be damned if I let him win." "What we do?" Mei Lin asked. Caleb looked at her, surprise flickering across his features at the "we." After a moment, his expression softened slightly. "We survive," he said. "We work harder than he expects. We prove to the bank that this ranch is stable, that it's worth their continued investment. We show them that marriage didn't make me weak, it made me stronger." Mei Lin thought about this, about what it would mean to truly stand beside Caleb in this fight. She'd already married him, already tied her fate to his. But this felt different, like choosing to step forward rather than simply standing still. "Then we fight," she said quietly. "Together." And for the first time since their wedding, Caleb smiled at her. A real smile, small but genuine, that transformed his weathered face. "Together," he agreed. In the weeks that followed, that promise was tested in small ways and large. Mei Lin threw herself into learning everything she could about the ranch, about managing a household that fed not just the 3 of them, but the ranch hands who worked the property. She learned to stretch supplies, to make meals that were filling but economical, to keep meticulous records of every expenditure. She also began to venture beyond the immediate ranch yard, riding out with Caleb when he checked fence lines or moved cattle. Ruth had taught her to ride using one of the gentler horses, and though Mei Lin would never be as comfortable in the saddle as people raised on ranches, she learned to manage well enough. Caleb seemed surprised but pleased by her interest. He showed her the boundaries of their land, the best grazing areas, the creek that Victor Hale coveted. He taught her to spot sick cattle, to recognize good grass from poor, to read the signs of weather in the desert sky. And slowly, through these shared hours on horseback under the endless Nevada sky, they began to know each other, not as strangers bound by desperation, but as partners learning to work in tandem. "You're a quick study," Caleb told her one afternoon as they rode back toward the house. "Most people raised in cities never take to ranch life." "I grew up on farm," Mei Lin reminded him. "Different kind, but still farm. Know how to work hard." "That you do." Caleb glanced at her sidelong. "I'm grateful for it. For you. I know I haven't said that enough." Mei Lin felt warmth spread through her chest. "You give me life, Caleb. Give me reason to keep going. That is gift I cannot repay." "You don't have to repay anything," Caleb said quietly. "We're even, more than even." But Mei Lin didn't feel even. She felt like she'd been given a second chance at something, not the life she'd planned perhaps, but a life nonetheless. And increasingly, it was a life she wanted to fight for. When the sun set that evening, painting the desert in impossible shades of orange and purple, Mei Lin stood on the porch of Red Mesa Ranch and felt something she hadn't experienced in months. She felt like she belonged. That sense of belonging lasted exactly 3 more weeks before Victor Hale made his next move. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in late September. Caleb had ridden out before dawn to check on cattle in the eastern pasture, leaving Mei Lin and Ruth to manage the morning routine. The ranch hands, Jack and Tom, were mending fence line near the barn, their voices carrying faintly through the still air as they worked. Mei Lin was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard the thunder of hooves approaching fast. Too fast. Her hands stilled, flour dusting her fingers, and she looked toward the window just as Ruth appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Something's wrong," Ruth said. "That's Caleb riding like the devil himself is chasing him." They rushed outside to find Caleb hauling his lathered horse to a stop in the yard. His face was dark with fury, his jaw clenched so tight Mei Lin could see the tendon standing out in his neck. "Jack! Tom!" he shouted toward the barn. "Get out here now!" The 2 ranch hands dropped their tools and came running. Caleb swung down from his saddle, nearly stumbling in his haste, and when he turned to face them all, Mei Lin saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. "Someone cut the fence on the eastern boundary," Caleb said, his voice rough. "The whole damn section is down. Cattle scattered everywhere. I counted at least 50 head missing, maybe more. They drove them off during the night." "Rustlers?" Jack asked, his hand automatically moving to the rifle he carried. "Hale's men," Caleb spat. "Had to be. The cuts were too clean, too strategic. This wasn't some drifter looking for an easy score. This was planned." Ruth made a small sound of distress. 50 head? Caleb, that's... "I know what it is," Caleb cut her off. "It's a quarter of what I need to make the bank payment. If I can't get them back, I'm finished." The words fell like stones into still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. Mei Lin felt her stomach clench with understanding. This wasn't just theft. This was sabotage, a calculated strike designed to cripple Caleb's ability to meet his obligations. "We go after them," she said, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Find the cattle, bring them back." Caleb shook his head. "They've got hours on us. Could have driven them anywhere by now. Into the hills, across Hale's land where I can't follow without trespassing, even into the next valley. And that's if I had the men to spare, which I don't." "So we just let them go?" Tom asked, his young face incredulous. "Let Hale steal from us and do nothing?" "I didn't say that." Caleb's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "I'm riding into Virginia City to report it to the sheriff. Not that it'll do much good. Sheriff Dawson's been in Hale's pocket for years. But I need it on record. Then I'll see if I can track where they took the herd." "I come with you," Mei Lin said immediately. "No." Caleb's response was sharp, automatic. "It's not safe. If Hale's men are bold enough to steal cattle this close to the house, There's no telling what they might do if they catch us out on the range. Then you should not go alone, Mei Lin insisted. Take Jack, take Tom, someone. I need them here protecting the ranch, protecting you and Ruth. Caleb moved to his horse, already preparing to mount again, despite the animal's exhaustion. I'll be back before dark. But Ruth stepped forward, placing a hand on the horse's bridle. Caleb Turner, you listen to me. You're angry and you're scared, and that's going to make you reckless. At least take an hour to think this through. Eat something. Rest your horse. You won't do anyone any good if you ride into town half-cocked and get yourself killed. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but Ruth's steady gaze didn't waver. After a long moment, he nodded tersely. 1 hour. Then I'm leaving. He stalked into the house, and the others followed more slowly. Mei Lin caught Ruth's eye and saw her own worry reflected there. This was worse than Hale's visit, worse than his threats. This was action, proof that Hale was willing to go beyond intimidation to get what he wanted. In the kitchen, Mei Lin forced Caleb to sit while she served him coffee and the breakfast Ruth had prepared earlier. He ate mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere, and Mei Lin watched him with growing concern. The man who'd been so careful, so measured in his approach to their marriage and their shared life, had been replaced by someone wound tight as a spring, ready to snap. Caleb, she said quietly, sitting across from him, what you do in town? What you really do? His eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw the calculation there, the weighing of whether to be honest or to protect her from the truth. I'm going to confront Hale, he said finally. Make it clear that I know what he did and that I won't stand for it. And then? And then we see if he's fool enough to push me into doing something we'll both regret. Ice formed in Mei Lin's chest. You mean fight? You mean violence? I mean defending what's mine. Caleb's jaw was set, his eyes hard. I've tried playing by the rules, Mei Lin. I've been patient and careful and tried to do everything right. And where has it gotten me? Hale's still stealing from me, the bank's still breathing down my neck, and I'm still one bad season away from losing everything. But if you hurt him, Mei Lin struggled for the English word for kill, couldn't find it, settled for, if you make him dead, then you lose everything anyway. They put you in jail. They take ranch. They take everything. Better to lose it fighting than to let him take it piece by piece while I stand by and watch. The words were bitter, edged with a desperation that frightened Mei Lin. She'd seen what desperation did to people, seen it in James's family when they'd needed someone to blame for their son's death, seen it in her own reflection when she'd collapsed in the desert. Desperation made people dangerous, unpredictable. She reached across the table and caught Caleb's hand, holding it despite his instinct to pull away. His skin was rough and warm, calloused from years of hard work, and she felt the tension vibrating through him like a plucked wire. You are not alone, she said firmly, willing him to hear her. You have me. You have Ruth. You have Jack and Tom. We fight together, not just you. You go to town, you talk to sheriff, you make record like you say, but you not fight Hale alone. You come back, we think together. Find better way. Caleb stared at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Then, slowly, his hand turned in hers, his fingers threading through hers in a grip that felt like drowning and anchoring at once. I don't know how to do this any other way, he said quietly. Fighting is all I know. Then I teach you different way, Mei Lin said. Like you teach me to ride horse, to know ranch. I teach you to be patient, to think before fight. A sound that might have been a laugh escaped him. You? Patient? You who confronted Victor Hale in our own yard 3 weeks ago? I learned from mistake, Mei Lin said primly, and was rewarded with another huff of almost laughter. The tension in his shoulders eased fractionally. He squeezed her hand once, then released it, pushing back from the table. All right, he said, I'll go to town. I'll talk to the sheriff. I'll keep my temper in check. But if Hale's there, if I see him, then you remember you have wife at home who needs you alive and not in jail, Ruth interjected from where she stood by the stove. And you remember that getting yourself killed won't save this ranch or protect Mei Lin. Caleb's mouth tightened, but he nodded. I'll remember. He left an hour later on a fresh horse, his rifle strapped to his saddle, but his temper more controlled than it had been. Mei Lin watched him ride out with her heart in her throat, praying to ancestors she hadn't spoken to in months that he would keep his word, that he would come home safe. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Mei Lin threw herself into work, washing floors that didn't need washing, reorganizing the pantry, helping Ruth prepare enough food for a small army because she couldn't stand to be still. Jack and Tom stayed close to the house, rifles within easy reach, watching the horizon for any sign of trouble. When the sun began its descent toward the western peaks and Caleb still hadn't returned, Mei Lin's anxiety crystallized into genuine fear. She stood on the porch, shading her eyes against the glare, searching the shimmering heat haze for any sign of a rider. "He'll be back," Ruth said, coming to stand beside her. "Caleb's been in tighter spots than this and come through fine." "How you know?" Mei Lin asked. "How you know he not do something? Something stupid because he's so angry?" Ruth was quiet for a moment. "I don't," she admitted. "Caleb's always been a careful man, but when it comes to this ranch, he can be reckless. It's his whole life, everything his father built and everything he's fought to keep. Losing it would destroy him." "He has more than ranch now," Mei Lin said softly. He has me. I try to be reason he come back safe." Ruth's hand found Mei Lin's shoulder, squeezing gently. "You're a good woman, Mei Lin. Better than Caleb probably realizes. Better than he deserves, if I'm being honest." Before Mei Lin could respond, Tom's shout cut through the evening air. "Rider coming in." Mei Lin's heart leapt into her throat. She watched as a single horse approached from the east, moving at a steady trot. As it drew closer, she recognized Caleb's silhouette, and relief flooded through her so powerfully her knees went weak. He was alive. He was whole. He'd come back. Caleb rode into the yard and dismounted stiffly, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. His face was grim, but he wasn't bleeding, wasn't obviously injured, and Mei Lin sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. "What happened?" Ruth demanded. "Did you see the sheriff?" "I did." Caleb handed his reins to Tom and climbed the porch steps, sinking into one of the chairs with a heavy sigh. "For all the good it did. Dawson took my report, made sympathetic noises, and basically told me there was nothing he could do without proof that it was Hale's men who cut the fence." "Did you see Hale?" "Oh, I saw him." Caleb's voice was tight. "He was in town, holding court at the saloon like he owns the place. Looked me right in the eye and asked how business was going. Had the nerve to say he'd heard I'd had some trouble with rustlers and offered to sell me some of his cattle to replace what I'd lost. At premium prices, naturally." Mei Lin felt anger rise hot in her chest. "He mock you. He steal from you and then mock you." "That's exactly what he did." Caleb scrubbed a hand over his face. "And there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it without proof, which is exactly what he's counting on." "So what now?" Ruth asked. "Now I ride out tomorrow and see if I can track where they took the herd. Maybe I'll get lucky, find them grazing on Hale's land where I can prove they're mine. More likely they've already been rebranded and sold, but I have to try." "And the bank payment?" Mei Lin asked quietly. Caleb's expression went bleak. "I'll have to sell more of the herd than I planned. It'll leave us vulnerable, but it's better than defaulting. Barely." He looked so defeated, so worn down by the weight of fighting an enemy who held all the advantages, that Mei Lin felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. She'd spent her whole life being powerless, subject to her father's decisions, then her mother's hopes, then James's family's cruelty. She'd been pushed and pulled, and finally abandoned, left to die because she had no voice, no power, no one to stand with her. But she wasn't powerless anymore. She was Mrs. Caleb Turner, wife of a rancher, mistress of Red Mesa Ranch, and she would be damned if she let Victor Hale destroy the man who'd saved her life. "We go to bank," she said suddenly. "Together. We talk to banker, show we are strong, show ranch is good, show we are—" She searched for the word Ruth had taught her. Stable. Family. Together. Caleb looked at her with surprise. "The bank's in Virginia City. That's a full day's ride there and back." "Then we ride. Tomorrow. Before you go looking for cattle." Mei Lin moved to stand in front of him, her hands on her hips. "You say marriage make you look stable to bank. Then we show them marriage. Show them I am real, we are real. Not just paper, not just, what is word, Arrangement. We are husband and wife. We work together. We strong together. Ruth was nodding slowly. She's right, Caleb. The bank's never even seen Mei Lin. For all they know, your marriage is just a story you told to look respectable. But if they meet her, if they see you two together, it might buy me some time, Caleb finished, his expression thoughtful now. Might convince them the ranch is stable enough to extend my loan instead of calling it. Yes, Mei Lin said firmly, we make them believe. We make them see ranch is good investment. Caleb studied her for a long moment, and Mei Lin saw the shift in his expression, from skepticism to consideration to something that looked almost like hope. When he finally nodded, she felt a small thrill of victory. All right, he said, we'll ride to Virginia City tomorrow. Talk to the bank, see if we can't convince them to give us more time. They left at first light the next morning, Caleb and Mei Lin on horseback, with Ruth staying behind to manage the ranch with Jack and Tom. Mei Lin had dressed in her best dress, the blue one she'd worn for the wedding, carefully cleaned and pressed, and Ruth had helped her arrange her hair in a style that looked neat and respectable. You look like a proper rancher's wife, Ruth had declared with approval. Show them what you're made of, dear. The ride to Virginia City took most of the morning. Caleb set a steady pace, conscious of not exhausting the horses, and they traveled in companionable silence through the desert landscape. Mei Lin had grown more comfortable with riding over the past weeks, and she found herself actually enjoying the journey despite its purpose. The vast sky overhead, the strange beauty of the red rock formations, the way the morning light gilded everything in shades of gold. As they neared Virginia City, the landscape began to change. More buildings appeared, first scattered homesteads and then denser clusters of houses and businesses. The town itself was bigger than Mei Lin had expected, bustling with activity. Wagons rumbling down dusty streets, people moving between storefronts, the distant sound of a piano from one of the saloons. Caleb led them to a substantial brick building on the main street, a sign above the door reading Virginia City Bank and Trust. He helped Mei Lin dismount and tied both horses to the hitching post outside. Ready? He asked, and Mei Lin saw the tension in his shoulders despite his calm tone. She straightened her dress, lifted her chin, and slipped her hand into his. His eyes widened slightly at the gesture, but after a moment, his fingers closed around hers. Ready, she said. Inside the bank was all dark wood and serious faces, tellers working behind a long counter and customers waiting on benches along the wall. A man in a fine suit looked up from his desk when they entered, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to surprise when he saw Mei Lin. Mr. Turner, he said, rising. I wasn't expecting you today. Mr. Whitman. Caleb's voice was respectful, but firm. I apologize for arriving unannounced. I wanted to introduce you to my wife. Whitman's eyes moved to Mei Lin, taking in her appearance with barely concealed curiosity. Ah, yes, I heard you'd married. Congratulations. Thank you. Caleb kept his hand steady in Mei Lin's, a united front. We wanted to discuss the ranch's financial situation and my upcoming loan payment. Whitman's expression became more guarded. Of course. Please, come into my office. He led them through a door into a private room lined with filing cabinets and dominated by a large desk. Caleb held a chair for Mei Lin before taking the seat beside her, and she appreciated the courtesy even as she sensed his nerves beneath the polite exterior. I understand you've had some difficulties, Whitman began, settling behind his desk. I've heard reports of cattle theft. 50 head, Caleb confirmed. Stolen 3 nights ago. I've reported it to the sheriff, but recovery seems unlikely. That's unfortunate. Whitman's tone was professionally sympathetic, but not particularly concerned. Does this impact your ability to meet your obligations? It makes it harder, Caleb admitted, but not impossible. I can still make the payment, though it'll require selling more of the herd than I'd planned. I see. Whitman steepled his fingers, his gaze assessing. Mr. Turner, I'll be frank with you. The bank has been concerned about your situation for some time. The ranch is profitable, yes, but barely. Your margins are thin, your debt's substantial. We've had concerns about the long-term viability of the operation. Concerns raised by Victor Hale, Caleb said flatly. Whitman's expression didn't change. Mr. Hale is a valued customer and a successful rancher. When he expresses concerns about a fellow businessman, we take them seriously. Even when those concerns are designed to undermine a competitor? Caleb's voice had hardened. Hale wants my land, Mr. Whitman. He's been trying to force me out for years. The cattle theft was his work. I'd stake my life on it. Those are serious accusations, Mr. Turner. Do you have proof? You know I don't. That's the whole point. The conversation was deteriorating. Mei Lin could feel it. She squeezed Caleb's hand, trying to convey caution, and when Whitman's eyes flicked to the gesture, she seized the moment. Mr. Whitman, she said, her English carefully pronounced. May I speak? Both men looked at her with surprise. Caleb's mingled with concern, Whitman's with patronizing curiosity. Of course, Mrs. Turner. I know you see small woman, Chinese woman, and you think maybe I not understand business, maybe I just decoration for husband. She saw Whitman's face flush slightly at the accuracy of her assessment. But I understand very well. I help manage ranch. I keep accounts. I know what we have, what we owe. And I tell you truth, Red Mesa Ranch is good business. Is hard work? Yes. Is tight sometimes? Yes. But is honest work, is good land, is worth your trust? She leaned forward slightly, holding Whitman's gaze. My husband, he work very hard, every day, before sun come up until after sun go down. He build this ranch from small thing to big thing. He pay debts always, never late, never miss. He is good man, honest man, and now he has wife, has family, has reason to make ranch stronger, better. Whitman was listening, his expression thoughtful now. Mei Lin pressed her advantage. You trust Mr. Hale because he has money, has power. But I ask you, what kind of man steals from his neighbor? What kind of man uses power to hurt others? My husband not perfect, but he honest. He work for what he has, and he will make payment. He will keep ranch strong. I promise you this. The silence that followed was thick with assessment. Mei Lin could feel Caleb's tension beside her, could sense Whitman weighing her words against whatever biases and calculations ran through his mind. Finally, Whitman spoke. Mrs. Turner, you're very articulate, more so than I expected, I confess. Because I am Chinese? Mei Lin asked bluntly. Because I am woman? I am both these things, yes. But I'm also smart. I'm also strong. And I'm also a person who keeps promises. A smile ghosted across Whitman's face, so brief Mei Lin almost missed it. Yes, I can see that. He turned his attention to Caleb. Mr. Turner, I'll be honest. The bank was prepared to call your loan when it comes due, to minimize our risk and cut our losses. But your wife makes a compelling argument. He opened a folder on his desk, scanning the papers inside. Your payment history is indeed flawless, and the ranch's numbers, while tight, are sustainable. With proper management and barring further catastrophes, he paused, seeming to make a decision. I'm willing to extend your loan for another year, provided you make a good faith payment now of at least 1/3 the total amount owed. Caleb's shoulders sagged with relief so profound it was almost visible. I can do that. I can make that payment. Then we have an agreement. Whitman pulled out a fresh piece of paper and began writing. I'll draw up the new terms. You'll need to sign and make the initial payment within 30 days. Thank you, Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. Thank you, Mr. Whitman. Don't thank me. Thank your wife. She's quite persuasive. Whitman's eyes moved to Mei Lin with something approaching respect. You're fortunate to have her, Mr. Turner. I know, Caleb said quietly, and when Mei Lin glanced at him, she saw something in his expression that made her heart skip. Gratitude, yes, but also something warmer, something that looked almost like pride. They completed the paperwork and left the bank an hour later, stepping out into the bright afternoon sunshine. Caleb was silent as they walked to their horses, his face unreadable, and Mei Lin began to worry that she'd overstepped, that her boldness in speaking to Whitman had somehow offended him. But then he turned to her, and instead of anger, she saw wonder in his eyes. You were incredible in there, he said, the way you talked to him, the way you stood up for the ranch, for me. Mei Lin, I don't even know what to say. Heat rose in her cheeks. I only say truth, say what I believe. You saved us. Caleb's hands came up to frame her face, a gesture so unexpected and tender that Mei Lin's breath caught. You bought us time, gave us a chance to survive this. I couldn't have done that alone. We are together, Mei Lin said simply. Your fight is my fight now. Caleb's thumb traced the line of her cheek, his touch gentle, and for a moment Mei Lin thought he might kiss her, really kiss her, not the chaste brush of lips he'd given her at their wedding. She could see the thought cross his mind, see him wrestle with it, propriety and desire warring in his expression. But then someone walked past them on the street, and the moment broke. Caleb dropped his hands and stepped back, clearing his throat. We should head back, he said. It'll be dark soon. Mei Lin nodded, trying to ignore the small pang of disappointment in her chest. Yes, Ruth will worry. Ruth. They rode back to Red Mesa Ranch in the gathering dusk, and if the silence between them was different now, charged with something new and uncertain, neither of them acknowledged it aloud. But when they arrived home and Ruth demanded to know how the meeting had gone, Caleb's first words were, Mei Lin was brilliant. She convinced Whitman to extend the loan. And when Ruth hugged Mei Lin with fierce pride, when Jack and Tom offered their congratulations, Mei Lin felt something settle in her chest, a sense of belonging that went deeper than simple survival. She'd fought for this place, for these people, for the man who'd given her a chance when the world had left her to die. And in fighting, she'd claimed Red Mesa Ranch not just as a refuge, but as a home. The victory, though, was short-lived. 2 weeks later, on a night when the moon hung thin and pale over the desert, the fire came. Mei Lin woke to the smell of smoke. She sat up in bed, disoriented, her mind struggling to process what her senses were telling her. Then she heard the shouts from outside, saw the orange glow through her window, and terror slammed into her chest. She threw off the covers and ran into the hallway in her nightgown, colliding with Ruth, who was also rushing from her room. The barn! Ruth gasped. The barn's on fire! They raced through the house and out into the yard where chaos reigned. The barn was fully engulfed, flames roaring into the night sky, smoke billowing in thick black clouds. Caleb was already there with Jack and Tom, forming a bucket brigade from the well, but Mei Lin could see it was futile. The fire was too big, too hot, too far advanced. The horses! Caleb shouted. Get the horses out! Jack disappeared into the smoke near the barn door and moments later emerged leading 2 panicked horses. Tom ran in after him, coming out with 2 more, but the barn held 6 horses and the flames were spreading fast. Caleb started toward the barn himself, but a beam collapsed with a shower of sparks, blocking the entrance. He stood there, fists clenched, watching his property burn, and Mei Lin saw the helpless rage on his face. Then she saw the riders. 3 figures on horseback, silhouetted against the fire glow, sitting calmly on the ridge overlooking the ranch. Watching. One of them raised a hand in a mocking salute. Caleb! Mei Lin pointed, her voice sharp with fury and fear. Caleb spun, saw the riders, and his expression went cold as winter ice. He ran for the house, emerging moments later with his rifle. But by the time he'd taken aim, the riders were already wheeling away into the darkness, disappearing as quickly as they'd appeared. He fired anyway, 3 shots that cracked through the night, but the bullets found only empty air. Damn them! Caleb snarled. Damn them to hell! They worked through the night, containing the fire enough to keep it from spreading to the other buildings, but the barn was a total loss. By dawn, it was nothing but a smoking ruin of charred wood and twisted metal. 2 horses had died in the blaze, trapped when the roof collapsed. The others milled nervously in the corral, traumatized and skittish. Caleb stood staring at the wreckage, his face blackened with soot, his eyes red-rimmed from smoke and fury, and something that looked dangerously close to despair. This was Hale, he said flatly. This was revenge for going to the bank, for getting the loan extended. He's sending a message. We go to sheriff, Mei Lin said, though her voice lacked conviction. We report. The sheriff won't do anything, Caleb cut her off. We have no proof, and those riders are probably halfway to Mexico by now. His hands clenched into fists. He's going to keep coming, keep taking, keep destroying until there's nothing left to save. Then we rebuild, Ruth said firmly. She looked as exhausted as the rest of them, her hair escaping its bun, her dress stained with soot. We rebuild the barn, we replace the horses, we keep fighting. With what money? Caleb's voice was raw. We just barely scraped together enough for the bank payment. Rebuilding the barn will cost... He broke off, shaking his head. I can't keep asking you all to sacrifice for this. Maybe it's time to accept that Hale's won. No. Mei Lin's voice cut through the defeated atmosphere like a blade. No, you not give up. We not give up. She walked to Caleb, grabbed his soot-stained shirt, and forced him to look at her. You save my life when I have nothing. You give me home, give me name, give me reason to live. Now I save you, I save us. We fight, Caleb. We fight until we win, or until there is nothing left to fight with. But we not give up. Not while I have breath in my body. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes. Surprise, admiration, and beneath it all, the first fragile stirring of hope returning. You're sure? He asked quietly. Because it's only going to get worse from here. Hale's shown he's willing to burn us out. Next time he might do worse. Then we be ready, Mei Lin said fiercely. We prepare. We defend. We show him we not afraid. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, and Mei Lin saw him make a choice, saw the moment he decided to keep fighting, to believe in the possibility of survival even when everything seemed lost. All right, he said, his voice gaining strength. All right, we fight. And as the sun rose over the ruins of the barn, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, Mei Lin stood beside her husband and knew that the real battle was only beginning. The days following the fire were the hardest Mei Lin had experienced since arriving at Red Mesa Ranch. The acrid smell of burnt wood lingered in the air, a constant reminder of what they'd lost and what still hung in the balance. Caleb threw himself into salvage work with almost desperate energy, pulling usable lumber from the ruins, cataloging what could be saved and what needed to be replaced. He worked from before dawn until well after dark, his hands blistered and bleeding, his face set in grim determination. Mei Lin watched him with growing concern. He barely ate, barely slept, barely spoke except to give terse instructions to Jack and Tom. The man who'd been learning to open up to her, who'd held her face so tenderly outside the bank in Virginia City, had retreated behind walls of anger and exhaustion. On the third night after the fire, she found him sitting alone on the porch long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring out at the darkness where the barn had stood. A bottle of whiskey sat at his feet, half empty, and his shoulders were hunched with defeat. Mei Lin approached quietly, settling onto the step beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The desert night was cool and still, stars blazing overhead in vast profusion, indifferent to human struggles below. You should be asleep, Caleb said finally, his voice rough. So should you. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob, she couldn't tell which. Can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see it burning, see those riders on the ridge watching, knowing they did it and there's not a damn thing I can do about it. Mei Lin reached out slowly and took the whiskey bottle from beside his feet, setting it out of reach. Caleb didn't protest. You drink this, you not think clear, she said gently. You need clear mind to fight Hale. Maybe I don't want to think clear. Maybe I want to just stop thinking for a while. But even as he said it, he knew it was futile. Caleb Turner wasn't a man who could escape his responsibilities, even temporarily. Caleb, Mei Lin waited until he looked at her. We will survive this. We will rebuild. With what? The question came out raw, stripped of pretense. The money we scraped together for the bank payment is gone. The barn will cost at least $500 to rebuild, probably more. We lost 2 horses worth $100 each. The winter feed that was stored in the barn, all destroyed. I'll have to buy hay now at premium prices. He shook his head. The numbers don't work, Mei Lin. Even with the extended loan, we're drowning. Then we find new numbers, Mei Lin said firmly. We sell something else. We work harder. There's nothing left to sell. I've already sold every head of cattle I can spare. The equipment's mortgaged. The land itself is collateral for the bank loan. Caleb's voice rose with frustration. Don't you understand? Hale's won. Maybe not today, maybe not next month, but eventually he'll grind us down until there's nothing left. Then why you not give up? Mei Lin challenged. Why you still here, still working, still fighting, if you think he already won? The question hung in the air between them. Caleb opened his mouth, closed it, struggled for an answer. I don't know, he admitted finally. Stubbornness, maybe? Pride? The fact that I can't stand the thought of that bastard winning. Or maybe, Mei Lin said softly, Because you have something worth fighting for now. Not just land, not just ranch. You have family. You have home. You have me. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and in the starlight she saw something crack in his expression, the walls he'd built crumbling just enough to let vulnerability through. "When did this happen?" he asked quietly. "When did you become the strong one?" "I always strong," Mei Lin said with a small smile. "You just not see it before. You too busy saving me to notice I can save you too." This time the sound that escaped him was definitely a laugh, rough but genuine. He scrubbed a hand over his face, and when he looked at her again, some of the terrible weight seemed to have lifted from his shoulders. "I don't deserve you," he said. "Maybe not," Mei Lin agreed, still smiling. "But you have me anyway, so you deal with it." Caleb reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers the way he had outside the bank. But this time there was no audience, no performance for others' benefit. This was just them. Two people who'd found each other in desperate circumstances and were slowly, cautiously, learning what it meant to truly be partners. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not giving up on me. On this." "We are married," Mei Lin reminded him. "For better or worse, remember? This is worse. We survive worse together, then better come later." They sat together on the porch until the eastern sky began to pale with approaching dawn, their hands still linked, drawing strength from each other in the quiet hours when hope was hardest to hold on to. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Mei Lin was hanging laundry when she heard a wagon approaching, and she turned to see an unfamiliar rig pulling into the yard. The driver was a woman, perhaps 45, with graying blonde hair and a capable, weathered face. She wore practical traveling clothes and handled the horses with easy competence. Caleb emerged from where he'd been working on the corral fence, wiping sweat from his brow. His expression was wary. Unexpected visitors rarely brought good news, but he approached courteously enough. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The woman climbed down from the wagon with a slight grimace that spoke of a long journey. "You'd be Caleb Turner, I expect. I'm Margaret Hayes. I own the Triple H ranch about 40 miles north of here." Recognition flickered across Caleb's face. "I've heard of your operation. You run cattle and horses both, if I remember right." "That's correct." Margaret's sharp eyes took in the burnt ruins of the barn, the signs of recent disaster, and her mouth tightened. "I also heard about your troubles with Victor Hale. That's why I'm here." Caleb's wariness deepened. "I'm not sure what you mean." "May we speak plainly, Mr. Turner? I've ridden a long way, and I'm not much for dancing around a subject." "Please," Caleb gestured toward the house. "Come inside. My wife can offer you some coffee." Margaret's eyes moved to Mei Lin with frank curiosity, but her expression was more interested than judgmental. "Your wife? Yes, I'd like to meet her properly." Inside, Ruth bustled to provide coffee and the remnants of the morning's biscuits while Mei Lin, Caleb, and Margaret settled at the table. The ranchwoman's presence filled the room, not with sighs, but with a quiet authority that commanded attention. "I'll get straight to it," Margaret said once they were settled. "Victor Hale has been a plague on this valley for 10 years. He's driven out 3 ranchers that I know of, using the same tactics he's using on you: theft, sabotage, financial pressure, and enough legal manipulation to keep the law from touching him." "If you know this, why hasn't anyone stopped him?" Caleb asked. "Because he's rich, connected, and smart enough not to leave evidence. And because most of the men he's targeted have been alone, no family, no allies, no one willing to stand with them when things got ugly." Margaret's gaze sharpened. "But you're not alone anymore, are you, Mr. Turner? You've got a wife, a household, and if I'm reading the situation right, the backbone to keep fighting even when most men would have folded. What's your interest in this?" Caleb's tone was cautious, but Mei Lin could hear the hope underneath. The possibility of an ally, someone who understood the fight they were in. "Self-preservation," Margaret said bluntly. "Hale's already got his eyes on my northern pastures. He hasn't made a move yet because I'm bigger than you, harder to push around. But if he succeeds in taking your land, I'll be next. And I'd rather fight alongside someone than wait for him to come for me alone." She leaned forward, her expression intent. "I'm proposing an alliance, Mr. Turner. You need resources, money for rebuilding, extra hands for protection, political support to counter Hale's influence. I can provide all of that. In return, I want your commitment to stand against Hale together, to share information about his movements, and to create a unified front that's harder for him to break. Caleb exchanged a glance with Mei Lin. She could see the wheels turning in his mind, weighing risks against benefits, suspicion against desperate need. "What kind of resources are we talking about?" he asked carefully. "I can loan you the money to rebuild your barn. $500 at fair interest, repayable over 2 years. I can also spare 2 men to help with the work and provide security against further attacks. And I have connections in Virginia City that Hale hasn't bought yet. Merchants, a lawyer, even a newspaper editor who'd be interested in publishing the truth about Hale's methods." It was more than Mei Lin had dared hope for, but Caleb's expression remained guarded. "Why would you take that risk? If Hale finds out you're helping me, you'll become his target too." Margaret smiled grimly. "Mr. Turner, I'm already his target. I'm just choosing when and how to fight rather than waiting for him to dictate terms." She paused, then added, "Besides, I knew your father. Samuel Turner was a good man, honest and hardworking. He helped me once when I was struggling to keep my ranch after my husband died. I never forgot that kindness. Consider this me repaying a debt." Mei Lin watched Caleb's face soften at the mention of his father. She reached under the table and found his hand, squeezing gently. When he looked at her, she nodded slightly. They needed this help. They couldn't afford to let pride or suspicion turn away a genuine ally. "All right," Caleb said slowly. "We accept your offer, Mrs. Hayes, and we'll stand with you against Hale." "Margaret, please. We're allies now. No need for formality." She extended her hand across the table, and Caleb shook it firmly. Then Margaret turned to Mei Lin. "And you, Mrs. Turner, I suspect you're a big part of why your husband is still fighting. I'd like to shake your hand as well." Mei Lin accepted the handshake, feeling the strength in Margaret's grip, the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. This was a woman who'd survived in a man's world through competence and determination, who'd built something despite obstacles. Mei Lin recognized a kindred spirit. "Thank you for help," Mei Lin said. "We are grateful." "Don't thank me yet. The fight's just beginning." Margaret pulled out a small notebook from her coat pocket. "Now, let's talk strategy. I want to know everything about Hale's attacks, dates, times, any evidence you've gathered, witnesses if you have them. We're going to build a case, even if the sheriff won't act. Sometimes the court of public opinion is more powerful than the law." They spent the next 2 hours discussing plans. Margaret's 2 men, experienced ranch hands named Pete and Sam, would arrive within the week to help rebuild the barn and provide additional security. Margaret also promised to speak with her lawyer about legal options for going after Hale, though she cautioned that it would be an uphill battle. "The key is making him more trouble than you're worth," Margaret explained. "Right now, he thinks you're isolated and weak. When he realizes you have allies, that attacking you means attacking me too, he'll have to recalculate whether the prize is worth the price." "Or he'll escalate," Caleb said grimly. "Possibly. That's why we need to be prepared for anything." Margaret's expression was serious. "I won't lie to you. This could get dangerous. Hale's shown he's willing to burn buildings. Next time it might be the house. You need to be ready to defend yourselves." The words sent a chill down Mei Lin's spine, but she kept her expression steady. She'd already decided she would fight for this place, for this life. If that meant facing danger, then so be it. Margaret left before noon, promising to return within the week with her men and the promised loan. After she'd gone, Caleb stood in the yard watching the dust from her wagon settle, his expression thoughtful. "What do you think?" he asked Mei Lin. "I think she is like us," Mei Lin said. "Someone who fight for what is theirs, someone who understand what we face." "I hope you're right." Caleb turned to her. "Because if we're wrong about her, if this is some kind of trap, we'll be in worse shape than before." "Is not trap," Mei Lin said with certainty she couldn't fully explain. "She speak truth. I know this." Caleb studied her face, then nodded slowly. "All right. I trust your instincts." The words warmed Mei Lin more than he probably realized. He was learning to see her as more than just someone he'd rescued, more than a convenient solution to his problems. He was learning to see her as a partner, someone whose judgment mattered. True to her word, Margaret returned 5 days later with Pete and Sam, 2 weathered cowboys in their 40s who looked like they could handle trouble. They also brought lumber, nails, and the promised loan in cash, $500 in gold and silver that made Caleb's eyes widen despite himself. "We'll want proper papers drawn up," Margaret said briskly. "But for now, this should get you started. Pete and Sam will help with the construction and keep watch at night. They're good men, trustworthy." Over the following weeks, the barn rose again from its ashes. With Pete and Sam's help, the work went far faster than it would have with just Caleb, Jack, and Tom. The structure took shape: walls, roof, stalls for the horses, a loft for hay. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid and functional, built to last. Mei Lin worked alongside Ruth to feed the expanded crew, to manage the household with additional people to care for. She also continued learning about the ranch operations, riding out with Caleb when he checked the herds, asking questions, absorbing information. Pete and Sam seemed surprised at first by her active involvement, but they quickly adapted, treating her with the respect due to the lady of the house, who happened to also understand cattle and fence lines. The work was exhausting, but there was something healing about it too. Every nail driven, every board placed, was a small act of defiance against Victor Hale. "We're still here," each action declared. "You haven't beaten us yet." But Hale wasn't idle either. 2 weeks after the barn raising began, Caleb rode back to the ranch in the middle of the afternoon, his face dark with fury. Mei Lin was in the garden when she saw him coming, and the set of his shoulders told her something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked as he dismounted. "Hale's filed a lawsuit," Caleb bit out, "claiming that my cattle damaged his property when they supposedly wandered onto his land. He's demanding $500 in compensation." Mei Lin felt her stomach drop. $500, exactly the amount Margaret had loaned them for the barn. "But your cattle not on his land. You keep them here." "I know that, you know that. But he's got 3 witnesses who'll swear they saw my herd on his property, causing damage to his fences and water sources." Caleb's hands clenched into fists. "It's all lies, but it doesn't matter. He's using the law as a weapon, trying to bleed me dry with legal fees even if I win the case." "We get lawyer," Mei Lin said. "We fight in court." "With what money? Lawyers cost more than I can afford, especially now." Caleb paced in agitation. "This is exactly what he wants. To tie me up in legal battles I can't afford to fight while the ranch suffers from neglect." "Then we tell Margaret. She says she has lawyer friend." Caleb stopped pacing, considering. "You're right. This is exactly why we formed the alliance." He moved toward the house. "I'll send word to her today." Margaret's response came swiftly. Her lawyer, a sharp-minded man named Thomas Brennan, rode out to meet with Caleb 3 days later. After reviewing Hale's lawsuit, Brennan's assessment was grim but not hopeless. "It's a nuisance suit," Brennan explained, "designed to harass rather than win. But we'll need to defend against it, which means time and money. However, I think we can turn this to our advantage." "How?" Caleb asked. "By filing a countersuit. You've got evidence of theft, arson, harassment. We can't prove Hale directly ordered these things, but we can create enough smoke to make him uncomfortable. And if we go public with the accusations, say through a newspaper article, we can damage his reputation even if we can't put him in jail." It was a risk, but it was also offensive action rather than simply defending. Caleb agreed, and Brennan began preparing the countersuit. Meanwhile, the tension at Red Mesa Ranch ratcheted higher. Pete and Sam took turns standing watch at night, rifles at the ready. Caleb kept his own weapons close, and he taught Mei Lin how to shoot, first the rifle, then the pistol. She was a quick learner, her hands steady despite the weapon's kick, her aim improving with practice. "You're a natural," Caleb said after a particularly good session, genuine admiration in his voice. "I protect what is mine," Mei Lin said simply. "So I learn." One night, about a month after the lawsuit was filed, Mei Lin was awakened by Pete's shout from outside. She grabbed the pistol Caleb had given her and ran to the window, her heart hammering. In the moonlight, she could see figures approaching the ranch, at least 5 riders, moving with deliberate intent. Caleb burst from his room, rifle in hand, Ruth close behind him. They converged in the main room as Pete and Sam took up defensive positions outside. "Stay inside," Caleb ordered. "All of you, bar the doors and windows." "No." Mei Lin's voice was firm. "We fight together, remember? I can shoot. I help defend." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The riders were getting closer, and their intentions were clearly hostile. "Fine, but you stay behind cover and you don't take unnecessary risks. Understood?" "Understood." They positioned themselves at different windows, weapons ready. The riders stopped about 50 yards from the house, just at the edge of rifle range. One of them urged his horse forward a few paces. Mei Lin recognized Victor Hale even in the darkness, his expensive coat and arrogant bearing unmistakable. "Turner," Hale called out. "We need to talk." Caleb cracked open the front door, his rifle trained on Hale. "You've got 1 minute before I start shooting trespassers. No need for hostility. I'm here to make you an offer." "I'm not interested in anything you're selling." "Not even peace?" Hale's voice carried an edge of mockery. "I'm willing to drop the lawsuit, Turner. Forget the whole thing. All you have to do is sell me your northern pasture, the section with the creek. I'll pay fair market value." "That land's not for sale." "Think about it. You need money for legal fees, for rebuilding. This solves all your problems." Hale's horse shifted beneath him. "Or you can keep fighting and watch everything you've built crumble around you. Your choice." Mei Lin watched Caleb's face and profile, saw the muscle jumping in his jaw, the white-knuckled grip on his rifle. She knew he was tempted, not by Hale's offer, but by the opportunity to end this with a bullet. She could see him calculating distance, wind, the likelihood of hitting his target. "Caleb," she said quietly. "Not like this." His eyes cut to her, and she saw the war raging in them. Rage against restraint, vengeance against wisdom. "If you kill him," she continued softly, "you lose everything. You go to jail, ranch is taken, we lose. He not worth your life, not worth our future." The words seemed to penetrate the red haze of his anger. Caleb's grip on the rifle eased slightly, though he didn't lower it. "You've got your answer, Hale," he shouted. "Get off my land." "You're making a mistake, Turner. This is the best offer you're going to get." "Then I guess I'm a fool. Now ride out before I decide to test my aim." For a tense moment, Hale didn't move. Then he laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that carried across the yard. "Have it your way. But when you're standing in front of a judge, when the bank's foreclosing and you're losing everything, remember this moment. Remember that I gave you a chance." He wheeled his horse around, and his men followed. They rode out slowly, deliberately, making it clear they left by choice rather than fear. After they disappeared into the darkness, the household slowly relaxed. Caleb set his rifle aside with trembling hands, and Mei Lin saw how close he'd come to doing something irreversible. "You were right," he said hoarsely. I wanted to so badly." "I know." Mei Lin moved to him, placed her hand over his heart. She could feel it racing beneath her palm. "But you did not. You choose right way. Choose us over revenge." Caleb covered her hand with his, holding it against his chest. "This is getting out of control, Mei Lin. He's escalating. Eventually someone's going to get hurt." "Then we be ready," she said. "We prepare, we stay strong, we—" The crack of gunfire cut through the night. It came from the direction of the barn, a single shot, followed by a shout. Caleb grabbed his rifle and was out the door before Mei Lin could stop him, with Pete and Sam converging from their positions. She followed despite her promise to stay inside, her pistol gripped tightly. They found Tom on the ground near the barn, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers, black in the moonlight. Jack was kneeling beside him, his face pale with shock. "One of Hale's men circled back," Jack said, his voice shaking. "Shot Tom and rode off before I could get a clear shot at him." Mei Lin dropped to her knees beside Tom, her hands moving automatically to assess the wound. The bullet had passed through the meat of his shoulder, painful and bleeding heavily, but not immediately fatal if they could stop the blood loss. "Get him inside," she ordered, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "Ruth, we need bandages and hot water." They carried Tom into the house, and Mei Lin worked with Ruth to clean and dress the wound while Caleb paced like a caged animal, rage and helplessness warring on his face. "This is attempted murder," he snarled. "Even Dawson can't ignore this." "They'll say it was a warning shot that went wild," Margaret's lawyer, who'd been staying in the bunkhouse, said grimly. He'd appeared at the commotion, his clothes hastily thrown on. "That it was too dark to see clearly. Without a witness who can identify the shooter, it's just your word against Hale's." "So he can just shoot at us? Just hurt my people and face no consequences?" "Not if we're smart about this." Brennan's eyes gleamed with calculation. "This might be exactly what we needed. We document everything: the wound, Tom's testimony, the timing right after Hale's visit. We add it to the countersuit as evidence of a pattern of escalating violence. We take it to the newspaper like we planned. And what good will that do if Tom's dead? Caleb demanded. Tom's not going to die, Mei Lin said firmly, tying off the last bandage. Bullet went through clean. He heal. She looked up at Caleb. But lawyer is right. We use this. We show everyone what Hale really is. Tom, pale but conscious, managed a weak smile. She's right, boss. Make my getting shot worth something. The next morning, Brennan rode to Virginia City with a detailed account of the shooting and the entire history of Hale's attacks on Red Mesa Ranch. 3 days later, the Virginia City Gazette published a front-page article titled "Range War in the Valley. Local Rancher Accuses Neighbor of Intimidation Campaign." The article laid out everything: the stolen cattle, the barn fire, the frivolous lawsuit, and finally the shooting. It stopped short of direct accusation, couching everything in careful language about alleged incidents and reported attacks. But the implication was clear, and the community's reaction was immediate. Suddenly people were talking. Merchants in Virginia City who'd been pressured by Hale began whispering about his methods. Other ranchers who'd suffered similar treatment started coming forward with their own stories. The tide of public opinion, which Hale had carefully cultivated for years, began to turn against him. And Victor Hale, for the first time, found himself on the defensive. But cornered animals were the most dangerous, and Hale was far from finished. The attack came on a moonless night 2 weeks after the article was published. This time there was no warning, no theatrical appearance to make threats. There was only the sudden thunder of hoofbeats, the crash of breaking glass, and the whoosh of flames as burning brands were thrown through the windows of Red Mesa Ranch. Mei Lin woke to smoke and fire and screaming. The house was ablaze, flames racing up the curtains and across the wooden floors with terrifying speed. She stumbled from her room into chaos. Ruth dragging her toward the door, Caleb shouting orders, gunfire cracking from outside where Pete and Sam were trying to drive off the attackers. They made it outside, coughing and gasping, just as part of the roof collapsed with a shower of sparks. Caleb turned back toward the house, and Mei Lin knew with terrible certainty that he was thinking of the rifle he'd left inside, the documents and family treasures he'd never have a chance to save. "Caleb, no!" she screamed, grabbing his arm. But he wasn't looking at the house anymore. He was looking past her, toward the barn where more flames were rising, and his face went white. "The horses," he choked out. "They're in the barn." He ran, and Mei Lin ran after him, her nightgown tangling around her legs. Behind them, Ruth was screaming for them to come back. But there was no time. The barn was already engulfed, flames eating through the new wood they'd so carefully placed. Caleb reached the barn door and yanked it open, smoke billowing out. He plunged into the inferno without hesitation, and Mei Lin followed before she could think about what she was doing, before fear could stop her. The heat was unbearable, the smoke so thick she couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. She heard horses screaming in terror, heard Caleb's voice shouting over the roar of flames. Her eyes streamed tears. Her lungs burned, but she pushed forward until she found him struggling with a panicked horse near the back stalls. Together, they got the horse moving toward the door. Then another, and another. The smoke was suffocating now, the heat so intense Mei Lin felt her skin blistering. She couldn't breathe, couldn't see, could only follow Caleb's shadowy form as he moved through the nightmare. They were almost out, almost safe, when the main support beam gave way with a crack like thunder. Caleb shoved Mei Lin toward the door, pushing her hard, and she stumbled out into the blessed cool air just as the beam fell. It caught Caleb across the shoulder and back, driving him to his knees. He cried out in pain, and Mei Lin screamed his name, already turning to go back for him. But Pete was there, bigger and stronger. And he plunged into the burning barn, while Sam held Mei Lin back despite her struggles. Pete emerged moments later with Caleb slung over his shoulder, both of them coughing and scorched, and they collapsed in the dirt a safe distance from the flames. The house and barn burned through the night, both buildings reduced to smoking ruins by dawn. But everyone had survived, Caleb with burns and bruises from the fallen beam, Mei Lin with singed hair and blistered hands, Ruth and the ranch hands with minor injuries from fighting the fires and the attackers. As the sun rose over the devastation, painting the ruins in shades of orange and gold, Mei Lin sat beside Caleb in the dirt, and watched everything they'd built turn to ash. "It's over," Caleb said, his voice empty. "He's won. There's nothing left." But when Mei Lin looked around, she saw Ruth standing defiant despite her soot-covered face. She saw Pete and Sam, wounded but unbowed, already discussing where they could rebuild. She saw Jack and Tom, anger burning in their eyes, ready to keep fighting, and she felt something crystallize in her chest. Not defeat, but fury. Not surrender, but determination so fierce it burned hotter than any fire. "No," she said, her voice low and hard. "He has not won. He destroyed buildings, but we are still here. We are still alive, and we will make him pay for this." Caleb turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw the last of his hope dying, replaced by a terrible certainty that they'd lost. But Mei Lin wasn't done. Not nearly. She stood, her nightgown in tatters, her hands blistered and bleeding, her hair singed, and looked down at her husband with absolute conviction. "You saved me from dessert," she said. "You give me life when I have nothing. Now I save you. I save us. I make Hale sorry he ever touched Red Mesa Ranch." And in that moment, standing in the ruins of their home with the dawn breaking around her, Mei Lin Turner transformed from a frightened immigrant into something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The words hung in the smoke-heavy air, a declaration of war from the most unlikely of warriors. Caleb stared up at Mei Lin, and something in her fierce expression seemed to reach through his despair. He struggled to his feet, wincing at the pain in his shoulder where the beam had struck him. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice hoarse from smoke and exhaustion. "I think we stop playing by rules Hale breaks whenever he wants," Mei Lin said, her eyes blazing. "I think we stop defending and start attacking. I think we make him hurt like he hurt us." Margaret Hayes arrived at mid-morning, her wagon loaded with supplies and followed by 3 more of her ranch hands. She took one look at the devastation, and her face went hard as stone. "This ends now," she said flatly. "I'm done watching that bastard terrorize this valley." They gathered in the only structure still standing, the bunkhouse that had somehow escaped the flames. Caleb, Mei Lin, Ruth, Margaret, Brennan the lawyer, and all the ranch hands crowded into the small space to plan their next move. "We have proof now," Brennan said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Witnesses saw the riders. Tom and Jack both got clear looks at faces in the firelight. We can identify at least 3 of Hale's men." "Identifying them and getting them to testify against Hale are 2 different things," Caleb pointed out. "They'll claim they were somewhere else, and Hale will provide alibis." "Then we don't rely on testimony," Mei Lin said. "We find evidence, we follow them, we watch them, we catch them doing something wrong." Margaret nodded slowly. "The girl's right. We've been reactive this whole time. It's time to go on offense." Over the next hour, they formulated a plan. Margaret would use her resources to hire a private investigator from Carson City, someone with no connection to the valley who could dig into Hale's business dealings without being recognized. Brennan would file criminal charges based on the witnesses' identification of the arsonists, forcing the sheriff to act even if he was in Hale's pocket. And Caleb, Pete, and Sam would begin surveillance of Hale's ranch, documenting his men's movements and looking for any evidence of illegal activity. But it was Mei Lin's suggestion that proved most valuable. "The workers," she said quietly. "Hale has many men work for him, yes? Maybe some of them not like what he does. Maybe some of them talk if we ask right way." "You mean turn one of his men against him?" Caleb's eyebrows rose. "That's risky. If word got back to Hale—" "Everything is risky now," Mei Lin interrupted. "We already lose everything we can lose. House, barn, almost lose lives. What more can he take? But if we get one man to talk, to testify, then we have real weapon against him." Margaret was nodding. "It's brilliant, actually. Hale rules through fear and money, but fear can turn, and money only goes so far when a man's conscience starts bothering him." "I know just the person," Brennan said slowly. "There's a cowhand named Miller who used to work for Hale. He quit about 6 months ago and moved to Silver Creek. Word was he left on bad terms, said some things about Hale that didn't sit right with him. If anyone might be willing to talk, it's him." "Then we talk to him," Caleb decided. "But carefully. We can't afford to spook him or let Hale find out." While the men worked on strategy and surveillance, Mei Lin and Ruth focused on the immediate problem of survival. With the house destroyed, they needed shelter, food, and basic supplies. Margaret's ranch hands erected tents near the bunkhouse for temporary housing, and merchants from Silver Creek, many of whom had read the newspaper article and were sympathetic to their plight, extended credit for essentials. The community response surprised Caleb. People who'd been too afraid to speak against Hale before were now offering quiet support. A widow from Silver Creek arrived with quilts and blankets. The general store owner sent a wagon loaded with food and supplies, refusing payment. Even the minister from town came out to offer prayers and practical assistance, organizing a fundraising effort to help rebuild. People are tired of being afraid, Ruth observed one evening as they prepared dinner over a campfire since they had no kitchen. Hale's pushed too far this time. Burning someone's home crosses a line that even scared folks can't ignore. Mei Lin stirred the pot of stew, her movements efficient despite her bandaged hands. The blisters from the fire were healing slowly, painful but not crippling. She refused to let them slow her down. Fear is powerful, she said quietly, but anger is more powerful. He'll make people very angry. 3 days after the fire, Brennan returned from his meeting with Miller, the former Hale employee. His expression was grim but excited. He'll testify, Brennan announced. Miller says he witnessed Hale ordering the theft of Turner's cattle. He also knows about the barn fire and has information about other illegal activities, water rights violations, intimidation of witnesses, even suspicions about a killing 5 years ago that was ruled an accident. Caleb's hands clenched. Will he swear to this in court? He will, but he wants protection. He's terrified of Hale, says the man's capable of anything. We'll need to keep him safe until the trial. Bring him here, Margaret said immediately. He can stay at my ranch under guard. Hale won't dare try anything on my property. It would be too obvious. The pieces were falling into place, but Mei Lin knew they were also running out of time. The bank payment was due in 2 weeks, and between the fire damage and legal expenses, they had no way to make it. Everything hinged on stopping Hale before he could complete his systematic destruction of Red Mesa Ranch. That night, unable to sleep in the cramped tent she now shared with Ruth, Mei Lin walked out into the desert. The moon was full, painting the landscape in silver and shadow, and the ruins of the house and barn stood like broken teeth against the sky. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Caleb approaching, moving stiffly because of his injuries. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. Too much thinking, Mei Lin admitted. Too much worry. They stood together in silence, looking at what remained of their home. Caleb reached out and took her hand, and Mei Lin felt the familiar warmth of his touch, now worn and weathered by all they'd endured together. I keep thinking about that day I found you on the trail, Caleb said quietly. How close you came to dying. How different everything would be if I'd ridden past, if I hadn't stopped. But you did stop, Mei Lin said. You saved me. You give me second chance at life. And look what I brought you to. Caleb gestured at the ruins with his free hand. Danger, destruction, a home that's nothing but ashes. You also bring me purpose, Mei Lin countered. Bring me family. Bring me... She struggled for the English word, then settled for... Bring me reason to be strong. Before you, I am just scared girl waiting to die. Now I am woman who fights, who stands, who matters. Caleb turned to face her fully, his gray eyes searching hers in the moonlight. You've always mattered, Mei Lin. From the moment I first saw you, you mattered. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning they'd both been dancing around for months. This marriage had started as convenience, as mutual survival. But somewhere along the way, through dumplings and conversations, through fires and fights, through standing together against an enemy who wanted to destroy them, it had become something more. Caleb, Mei Lin said softly, when all this is over, when we win or lose, when we know what future holds, I want you to know something. What? I not regret. Not one moment. Even if we lose everything, even if we must start again with nothing, I not regret choosing you, choosing us. Caleb's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with a tenderness that made her breath catch. Neither do I. And Mei Lin, we're not going to lose, I promise you that. Then he kissed her, and it was nothing like the brief brush of lips at their wedding. This was real, deep, full of all the emotion they'd been holding back. Mei Lin's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer despite the pain it must have caused his injuries, and for a moment the ruins and the danger and the uncertainty all fell away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply.
"I don't know when it happened, but I do. I love you, Mei Lin Turner." "I love you too," Mei Lin whispered, the English words still strange on her tongue, but absolutely true. "I love you, husband." They stood wrapped in each other's arms under the Nevada moon, and Mei Lin felt something settle deep in her chest, the certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. Not as convenient partners or reluctant allies, but as two people bound by something far stronger than desperation. As two people bound by love. The next morning brought news that changed everything. The private investigator Margaret had hired arrived with a thick folder of documents and a grim expression. "Hale's in trouble," the investigator reported. "Real trouble. He's been embezzling from his investors, cooking his books to hide losses. The ranch isn't nearly as profitable as he claims. He's actually drowning in debt, has been for years. That's why he's so desperate to acquire Turner's water rights. He needs them to save his own operation from collapse." Caleb and Mei Lin exchanged glances. This was exactly the kind of leverage they needed. "There's more," the investigator continued. "I found evidence of bribery, payments to Sheriff Dawson, to the bank examiner, even to some of the territorial officials. If this gets out, Hale won't just lose his ranch. He'll go to prison." Brennan's eyes gleamed. "This is it. This is what we need to destroy him." But Margaret held up a hand. "We need to be smart about how we use this. If we go public too soon, Hale will destroy the evidence and disappear. We need to trap him first, force him into a position where he can't run." They spent hours planning, weighing options, calculating risks. Finally, they settled on a strategy that was bold to the point of recklessness, but it was their best shot. They would offer Hale exactly what he wanted, the water rights to Red Mesa Ranch. But the offer would be a trap, designed to draw him into an admission of his crimes in front of witnesses. "He won't believe it," Caleb objected. "He knows I'd never sell willingly." "That's where I come in," Mei Lin said. "I tell him I convince you. I tell him I am tired of fighting, tired of danger. I want safety, want peace. I make him believe I break you down." "Absolutely not," Caleb said immediately. "I'm not putting you in danger like that. We all in danger already," Mei Lin pointed out. "But this way we control when and where. We set trap, we make sure we have witnesses, we end this." The argument raged for hours, but Mei Lin was immovable. Finally, Caleb surrendered, though his expression made clear he hated every aspect of the plan. 2 days later, Mei Lin rode alone into Virginia City and requested a meeting with Victor Hale. His surprise at her appearance was evident, but his arrogance quickly overcame his caution. He agreed to meet her at the hotel restaurant, public enough to seem safe, but private enough for frank conversation. Mei Lin dressed carefully for the meeting, wearing her best remaining dress and arranging her hair to look both respectable and slightly defeated. She needed to appear like a woman at the end of her rope, desperate enough to betray her husband's dreams. Hale was already seated when she arrived, his expensive suit and confident posture a stark contrast to her worn clothing. He rose with mocking courtesy as she approached. "Mrs. Turner, this is unexpected. I confess I'm curious why you wanted to meet." Mei Lin sat, folding her hands on the table. She made her voice soft, defeated. "I want to talk about ending the fight between you and my husband." Hale's eyebrows rose. "Your husband has been quite clear about his unwillingness to negotiate." "My husband is a stubborn man," Mei Lin said, "but I am a practical woman. I see what this war does to us. Lose home, lose barn, almost lose lives. I am tired, Mr. Hale. I want peace." Interest sparked in Hale's eyes. "Go on." "The water rights you want, the northern pasture with the creek. My husband will not sell, but I am his wife. I have influence." She let a hint of shame color her voice. "He listens to me now, trusts me. If I tell him we must sell, that I cannot live like this anymore, he will agree." "Why would you do that?" Hale's voice was suspicious, but she could see him wanting to believe her. "Because I not want to die," Mei Lin said bluntly. "Because I come to America for better life, not to burn in fires or get shot by your men. Because I convinced Caleb to marry me for safety, and now there is no safety, only danger." She met Hale's eyes.
You win, Mr. Hale. You break us. I just want to survive what comes next. Hale studied her for a long moment, and Mei Lin held her breath. Everything depended on him believing she'd turned on Caleb, that desperation had overcome loyalty. What do you want in return? Hale asked finally. Money. Enough for us to start somewhere else, far from here. And I want it in writing that you will not follow, will not hurt us again. She leaned forward slightly. Give me this, and I give you the water rights. My husband will sign whatever papers you want. Just like that? After everything he's fought for? Men fight for pride, Mei Lin said. Women fight for survival. I choose survival. Hale's smile was ugly with triumph. I knew you were a smart one, smarter than your husband, certainly. He signaled the waiter for wine. All right, Mrs. Turner, let's discuss terms. They negotiated for an hour, Hale's greed making him blind to the trap closing around him. He admitted to the cattle theft, laughing about how easy it had been. He boasted about the fires, about how his men had followed his orders perfectly. He even hinted at the bribes he'd paid to keep the law looking the other way. And in a private dining room next door, hidden behind a false wall, Brennan and a court stenographer documented every word. The hotel owner, a man Hale had bullied years ago, had agreed to help set up the sting, and his cooperation had been invaluable. Finally, Hale pushed a piece of paper across the table. This is my offer, $5,000 for the water rights, and I'll leave you alone. Your husband signs this, and we're done. Mei Lin looked at the paper, then at Hale. How I know you keep your word? How I know you not just take land and then hurt us anyway? Because I'm a businessman, Mrs. Turner. I want the water rights, not a murder charge. Once I have what I need, you're no longer worth my attention. And the fires, the shooting? You admit you order these things? Hale's eyes narrowed slightly. Why does it matter? You already know I did them. I want to hear you say it, Mei Lin said. I want to know exactly what kind of man I am making deal with. It was a risk, pushing too hard, but Hale's arrogance was his weakness. He laughed, the sound harsh and cruel. Fine. Yes, I ordered the barn burned, both times. Yes, I had my men steal your cattle. Yes, I told them to shoot that cowhand, though they were supposed to kill him, not just wing him. And yes, I paid Sheriff Dawson to look the other way and the bank examiner to pressure Turner's loan. He leaned back, smiling. Happy now? You know exactly who you're dealing with. A man who gets what he wants, no matter what it takes. I know exactly who you are, Mei Lin agreed softly. I know you are a man who confessed to crimes in front of witnesses. Hale's smile froze. What? The door to the private dining room opened and Brennan emerged with the stenographer and 3 men Mei Lin didn't recognize. Territorial marshals, she realized, brought in from Carson City specifically because they were beyond Hale's reach. Victor Hale, one of the marshals said, moving forward with handcuffs. You're under arrest for arson, theft, attempted murder, bribery, and conspiracy. Hale's face went white, then red with fury. He lunged toward Mei Lin, but Caleb appeared from where he'd been waiting in the hotel lobby, moving between them with deadly intent. Don't even think about touching her, Caleb said, his voice deadly quiet. Hale stared at them both, understanding dawning. You set me up. You lying Chinese... Careful, Margaret Hayes said, appearing from the dining room as well. There are witnesses here, and I'm sure the marshals would be interested in adding racial harassment to your list of charges. The marshals took Hale away, still protesting, still threatening, but his power had been broken, shattered by his own arrogance and greed. The evidence Brennan had gathered, combined with the confession they'd just recorded, was more than enough to ensure Hale would spend years in prison. After he was gone, Caleb pulled Mei Lin into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Don't ever scare me like that again, he said roughly. Sitting in that lobby, listening to you talk to him, knowing he could hurt you. But he did not, Mei Lin pointed out, her voice muffled against his chest. Plan worked. We won. We won, Caleb agreed, pulling back to look at her face. You won. You brilliant, terrifying, amazing woman. The celebration that night at Margaret's ranch was jubilant but subdued. They'd won the battle, but the war's cost was evident in their exhausted faces, their injuries, their losses. Red Mesa Ranch still lay in ruins, the bank payment was still looming, and rebuilding would take months if not years. But Miller's testimony, combined with the evidence against Hale, had started a cascade of revelations. Sheriff Dawson resigned rather than face corruption charges. The bank examiner was fired and replaced with someone honest. And the territorial governor, embarrassed by the scandal, ordered a full investigation into land disputes throughout the valley. More importantly, Hale's business dealings began to unravel. With him in jail and unable to manage his affairs, his creditors descended. Within a week, his ranch was seized by the bank to cover his debts. The property was auctioned, and Margaret Hayes purchased the northern section, including the water rights Hale had coveted so desperately. Then she did something that surprised everyone. She transferred those water rights to Caleb Turner as a gift. "Your father helped me when I needed it," she said simply when Caleb protested. "Now I'm helping his son. Besides, you'll make better use of that water than Hale ever would have." The gesture, combined with the community support that continued to pour in, gave them the foundation they needed to rebuild. But it was the bank's decision that truly secured their future. Mr. Whitman himself rode out to the ranch, or what remained of it, 2 weeks after Hale's arrest. He surveyed the ruins with a troubled expression, then turned to Caleb and Mei Lin. "I owe you both an apology," he said formally. "The bank was influenced by Hale's lies and by our own prejudices. We failed to see the strength of your operation and the character of its owners." He pulled out a document. "We're forgiving the remaining balance of your loan as compensation for the role our examiner played in Hale's schemes. The ranch is yours, free and clear." Mei Lin watched Caleb's face as the words registered, saw the disbelief give way to overwhelming relief. The weight he'd been carrying for years, the debt, the fear of losing his father's legacy, lifted in an instant. "Thank you," Caleb managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Whitman." After the banker left, Caleb turned to Mei Lin and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite his still healing injuries. When he set her down, they were both laughing and crying at once. "We did it," he said. "We actually did it." "We survive," Mei Lin corrected. "Now we rebuild." And rebuild they did. The months that followed were hard work, but it was joyful work, building rather than defending. The house rose first, larger than before, with real glass windows and a proper kitchen that made Ruth weep with happiness. Then came a new barn, stronger and better designed. The community continued to help. Neighbors contributing labor, merchants extending credit, even strangers who'd read about their fight sending donations. As winter approached, Red Mesa Ranch stood transformed. The physical structures were newer and better, but the real transformation was in the people who called it home. Caleb no longer carried the weight of the world alone, had learned to trust and accept help. Ruth had taken on a new confidence, managing expanded household operations with authority. Pete and Sam had become permanent fixtures, loyal hands who'd proven their worth in fire and danger. And Mei Lin had evolved from the frightened woman dying in the desert into the heart of Red Mesa Ranch, its manager, its conscience, its fierce defender. Her English was now fluent, though touched with an accent she'd never lose. Her understanding of ranch operations was comprehensive, and her presence, which had once seemed like a desperate convenience, had become absolutely essential to everything the ranch was and would become. One evening in late November, as the first snow dusted the distant mountains, Mei Lin and Caleb stood on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. "You know what tomorrow is?" Caleb asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Thursday?" Mei Lin guessed. "Our anniversary. 1 year since we got married." Mei Lin's eyes widened. Had it really been only a year? It felt like a lifetime, like the frightened girl who'd said, "I do," in this very yard, was someone else entirely. 1 year, she repeated softly. "So much happens in 1 year." "Everything happened in 1 year," Caleb corrected. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Mei Lin, I know we got married for practical reasons. I know it started as an arrangement, a solution to problems we both faced, but somewhere along the way it became real for me. You became real for me in a way I never expected." "For me too," Mei Lin said. "I marry you to survive, but I stay because I love, because this is home, because you are my home." Caleb pulled a small box from his pocket, his movements nervous in a way Mei Lin had never seen. "I bought this last time I was in Virginia City. I wanted to give you something that meant more than that first ring I got you, the one I bought in a hurry just to satisfy the ceremony." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold band set with a small but perfect jade stone. "The merchant said jade was important in Chinese culture. I hoped, you might like it." Mei Lin's throat tightened with emotion. The jade was the exact shade of her mother's bracelet, the precious link to her old life that she still wore every day. That Caleb had noticed, had thought to honor her heritage this way, meant more than she could express. "Is beautiful," she whispered. "Is perfect." Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger beside the original gold band. "I'm asking you to marry me again, Mei Lin. Not for the bank, not for the ranch, not for protection or practicality. Just because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you?" Mei Lin looked up at him, this tall rancher who'd saved her life, and then somehow managed to save her heart as well. "Yes," she said simply. "Always yes." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Mei Lin felt something click into place, the final piece of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving. She'd come to America seeking a better life and found only betrayal and death. She'd been abandoned in the desert to die, and had been saved by a stranger's mercy. She'd married for survival and discovered love. She'd fought for a home and in fighting had claimed it completely. The years that followed proved the victory wasn't just against Victor Hale, but against everything that had tried to destroy them. Red Mesa Ranch thrived under Caleb and Mei Lin's joint management, their complementary strengths creating something stronger than either could have achieved alone. They expanded the herd, improved the land, built relationships with neighboring ranches based on mutual respect rather than fear. Mei Lin became known throughout the valley not as that Chinese woman, but as Mrs. Turner, a shrewd businesswoman and fierce advocate for fairness. She started a small school for ranch children, teaching both English and Cantonese, and her reputation spread until families from miles around sought her counsel on matters ranging from business to marriage. She also finally wrote to her mother, a long letter explaining everything that had happened, the truth about James's death, her abandonment, her rescue, and her marriage to Caleb. She sent money with the letter, earnings from the ranch that ensured her mother would never suffer hardship again. The reply took months to arrive, but when it did, Mei Lin wept over her mother's words of pride and blessing. Her mother had worried, had grieved, but understood the choices Mei Lin had made and approved of the life she'd built. Children came, 2 daughters and a son, each of them a perfect blend of their parents' heritages. They grew up speaking both English and Cantonese, comfortable in both cultures, neither entirely Chinese nor entirely American, but something new and uniquely themselves. Ruth remained with the family until her death at 73, a beloved grandmother figure to the children and Mei Lin's closest confidant. Margaret Hayes became not just an ally, but a true friend, her ranch in Red Mesa cooperating to create a power block in the valley that ensured fair treatment for all ranchers. And Caleb remained the steady heart of Red Mesa Ranch, his quiet strength supporting everything they built. The desperate, angry man who'd found Mei Lin dying in the desert had transformed into someone content and whole, a man who'd learned that true strength came not from fighting alone, but from standing together. Victor Hale served 15 years in territorial prison and emerged a broken man, his fortune and influence destroyed. He left Nevada and was never heard from again, a cautionary tale about the consequences of greed and cruelty. On their 25th anniversary, Caleb and Mei Lin stood on the porch of Red Mesa Ranch, expanded now, prosperous, home to 3 generations, and looked out over the valley that had once been a battlefield. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked, his hair now streaked with silver but his gray eyes still sharp. "Staying here instead of going back to China? Building this life instead of the one you'd planned?" Mei Lin looked at the ranch that had become legendary in the valley, at the children and grandchildren playing in the yard, at the man who'd been her partner through everything. She thought about the terrified girl who'd collapsed in the desert, certain she would die alone and forgotten. "I regret nothing," she said firmly, taking Caleb's weathered hand in hers. "I was meant to be here, meant to find you, meant to build this life." She smiled. "Everything that happened, all the pain, all the fear, all the fighting, it brought me to exactly where I belong." Caleb raised her hand to his lips, kissing the fingers that wore both the simple gold band from their wedding day and the jade ring he'd given her a year later. I love you, Mei Lin Turner. 25 years, and I love you more now than I did then. And I love you, Mei Lin said. My husband, my partner, my home. As the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold, their grandchildren called them in for dinner. They walked inside together, hands still linked after all these years, into the warmth and laughter of the family they'd built from ashes and determination. The story of Mei Lin and Caleb Turner became legend in the valley, a tale told around fires and dinner tables, a reminder that from the darkest moments could come the brightest futures, that mercy and courage could triumph over cruelty and greed, that love, real love, was worth fighting for even when the odds seemed impossible. And sometimes, late at night when the desert wind whispered through the sage, old-timers swore they could still hear the echo of hoofbeats on the trail where it all began. The sound of a rancher riding to save a dying woman, the moment when two desperate souls found each other and in finding, created something that would endure long after they were gone. Red Mesa Ranch stood for generations, a testament to the woman who'd been left to die and the man who'd stopped to save her, to the partnership forged in fire and sealed in love, to the truth that the strongest foundations are often built on the most unlikely beginnings. And in the ranch house, in a place of honor, hung a jade bracelet beside a faded photograph, a young Chinese woman and a weathered rancher, standing together in front of a newly rebuilt barn, their faces showing exhaustion and determination and something else. Hope, the kind of hope that survives deserts and disasters, that transforms strangers into lovers, that turns a marriage of convenience into a love story for the ages, the kind of hope that endures.